Hundreds of mafia bosses, politicians, and billionaires, all dressed in expensive suits, sat silently inside New York's grandest cathedral, awaiting the wedding of the century. The groom was Damian Valenti, a man in a wheelchair who struck fear into the hearts of all of America. But the bride vanished, without a trace, without explanation. Only a deathly silence remained, and the gaze of hundreds watching to see how America's most powerful king would fall. Just then, a waitress stepped out from the crowd and asked a question that sent the entire cathedral into a breathless silence. Like and comment on the city you're viewing to let me know how far my story has progressed. Don't leave, because what happens next will change everything. The morning of Damian Valenti's wedding, the sky over Manhattan sat low and gray, the kind of gray that made the whole city look like it was holding its breath. By 7:30, St. Augustine Cathedral's outer perimeter had been locked down with a precision usually reserved for presidential visits. Snipers occupied rooftops on 3 surrounding blocks. Black SUVs lined both sides of the avenue, engines idling, exhaust curling in the cold air like slow smoke. Every 50 feet along the cathedral's outer wall stood a man in a dark suit with an earpiece and a jacket cut wide enough to hide what was underneath. Inside, it was different. Inside, the cathedral had been transformed into something that looked, on the surface, like a celebration. White orchids cascaded from every arch. Silk draped the ancient stone columns in ivory and pale gold. The pews were filled with 600 people who together represented more concentrated power than most governments. Senators and federal judges sat beside men whose names never appeared in newspapers, but who controlled entire ports, highways, and construction unions stretching from the Jersey Shore to the Canadian border. Every major family from New York, Chicago, Miami, and Los Angeles had sent representatives, not out of affection for Damian Valenti, but because declining the invitation would have been interpreted as an act of war. This was not simply a wedding. Everyone in the room understood that. This was Damian Valenti's declaration that he was still untouchable. He had survived an assassination attempt 18 years ago that had left him paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a custom-built titanium wheelchair that cost more than most people's homes. The men who had ordered the attack were dead within 6 months, all of them, including 2 who had been under federal protection. Nobody talked about that openly. Nobody talked about most things connected to Damian Valenti openly. His name was spoken in certain circles the way people speak about a change in weather, with a kind of cautious respect for something that operated entirely outside human control. He was 51 years old. His hair had gone silver at the temples years ago, and he'd stopped fighting it. His face was angular and deeply lined, not from age exactly, but from something harder than age, the specific erosion that comes from decades of making decisions that cost people their lives. His eyes were a pale, almost colorless gray that people rarely held for more than a few seconds. Not because he was aggressive, because he was entirely still in a way that most human beings simply were not. That stillness was the thing that terrified people most about him. Not the bodyguards, not the organization, the stillness. He sat at the front of the cathedral in his wheelchair, positioned where the groom traditionally stood, wearing a charcoal suit that had been made for him in Milan by a tailor who flew to New York twice a year and never discussed his client list. His hands rested in his lap. He wasn't looking at the entrance doors. He was looking at nothing in particular, with an expression that gave nothing away, which was the only expression most people had ever seen him wear. Elena Mercer was in the back of the cathedral, behind a service door that connected to the kitchen staging area. She was wearing the standard catering uniform, white button-down shirt, black slacks, black apron tied at her waist, and she was holding a tray of champagne flutes that nobody had touched yet because the ceremony hadn't started and already something was wrong. She could feel it, the shift in the air. She'd been catering events in this city for 6 years, everything from corporate dinners to private galas, and she knew the particular texture of a room when something had gone sideways. It wasn't loud. It was the opposite of loud. It was the way conversations at the edges of a room suddenly became murmured and then stopped. It was the way certain men near the front started touching their earpieces one after another, like a slow wave passing through water. Elena was 34 years old, with dark hair she kept pulled back when she worked, and hands that had been roughened by years of physical labor she never complained about. She was not the kind of woman who stood out in a room. She had spent most of her adult life learning not to, moving quietly through spaces occupied by people with far more money and far more problems than she had, doing her job with a precision that her supervisor described as invisible efficiency, which she took as the compliment it was intended to be. She was not supposed to be paying attention to what was happening at the front of the cathedral. She was supposed to be monitoring the service flow, making sure the glasses were polished, making sure the staff stayed behind the designated line. But she was looking at the man in the wheelchair. She was looking at him because something about the quality of his stillness had changed in the last 4 minutes, and she didn't know why that registered with her, but it did. It had shifted from controlled to something that she recognized, without being able to name it immediately. She'd seen it before. She knew exactly where she'd seen it before, and the recognition hit her somewhere behind the sternum. Her brother Marcus had sat that way in the weeks after his accident. Not crying, not visibly distressed, just present in his body in a way that looked like absence, like he'd gone somewhere inside himself where the damage couldn't reach him, because the damage was too large to face directly. She set the tray down on the nearest surface and stayed where she was. 30 meters away, in the private vestibule that connected the cathedral's main nave to the attached rectory building, Damien's head of security, a man named Coyle, built like something assembled from reinforced concrete, was speaking very quietly into his earpiece while staring at a bank of security monitors. What he was seeing on those monitors, or rather what he was not seeing, had turned his face into something carefully neutral, in the way that faces go neutral when the person wearing them is managing a significant internal event. The footage from camera 7, the one positioned at the entrance of the bridal suite 2 floors above, had gone to static at 11:47. By the time his team reached the suite at 11:52, it was empty. Vivian DeLuca's dress was hanging on the back of the door. Her shoes were beside the vanity. Her phone was on the table, unlocked, showing a text conversation that had been deliberately left visible. Coyle had read the last message twice. He had not shown it to Damien yet. He needed 2 more minutes to understand what he was dealing with before he did. Downstairs, the cathedral organist had been playing background music for 45 minutes, which was 20 minutes longer than planned, and the guests had begun to notice. The sound of 600 people trying to pretend they hadn't noticed filled the enormous stone space with a low, uncomfortable murmur that the music could not quite cover. Father Martin. No, not Father Martin. This wasn't that kind of ceremony. The officiant, a retired federal judge named Hargrove, who owed Damien a favor that predated both of their hairlines, had been standing at the front for 20 minutes with the expression of a man who had been in difficult rooms before and understood that his job right now was to stand still and look untroubled. At the third pew from the front, Marco Fieri leaned toward the man sitting next to him, a heavy-set man named Caruso, who ran the Philadelphia operation, and said very quietly, "She's not coming." Caruso said nothing. He was watching Damien. Damien hadn't moved. At 11:58, Coyle came through the side door and approached the wheelchair at an angle that positioned him behind and to the right, out of the eye line of the crowd. He bent forward slightly, and whatever he said it in 4 words, maybe 5, directly into Damien's ear. The room watched Damien's hands. That was the tell, if there was one. Nobody knew this consciously, but everyone was watching his hands because they were the only part of him that occasionally betrayed anything. His hands did not move. He said something back to Coyle that nobody could hear. Coyle straightened, gave a single, small nod, and walked back through the side door. For 60 seconds, Damien sat without moving, without changing his expression, while 600 people pretended not to stare at him. Then the murmuring got louder, because the truth of what was happening had begun filtering through the room the way these things always do in large gatherings. Not from any announcement, but from the specific language of absence. The bridal procession music hadn't begun. The doors at the back hadn't opened. The officiant was looking at his watch. Someone at the back of the room, Elena couldn't see who, said, clearly enough to carry, "She left him." The 2 words hit the room like something dropped from a height. And that was when Elena Mercer picked up her tray, set it back down, took off her apron, folded it over the service table, and walked out from behind the service door into the main aisle of the cathedral. She didn't have a plan. She understood this. She had no plan, no strategy, no considered reason for what she was doing. She had a feeling, the same feeling she'd had 12 years ago when she'd walked into Marcus's room at 3 in the morning and found him sitting in the dark 6 weeks after the accident that had ended everything he'd been building, and she'd understood without any words passing between them that leaving him alone in that particular moment would be something she would spend the rest of her life regretting. She walked up the center aisle. People noticed her. Of course they noticed her. She was the wrong person in the wrong place. A catering waitress moving toward the front of the room with the quiet, direct purpose of someone who had somewhere to be. She saw the heads turning. She saw the bodyguards near the front register her approach and shift their weight. One of them, a tall man with a shaved head whose jacket barely contained his shoulders, stepped half into the aisle in front of her. He didn't say anything. He just stopped her with his physical presence the way these men were trained to do. Elena looked at him. "I'm not a threat," she said. "I just want to talk to him." The bodyguard stared at her for a moment with an expression that suggested he processed approximately 12 requests per day from people who claimed not to be threats. "Step back," he said. Flat. Final. "I will," she said. "After." Something in her voice, or possibly something in her face, the utter absence of performance in it, made him hesitate for just long enough. Damien had heard the exchange. He'd heard everything. His hearing had gotten extraordinarily good in the years since the injury, a compensation that still sometimes surprised him. He turned his head slightly and looked at the woman standing at the edge of the aisle. She was not dressed for this room. She had not dressed for this room because she worked in it. She was looking at him without the particular blend of pity and fear that he was accustomed to receiving from strangers, which was notable. She was looking at him the way someone looks at another person they are trying to accurately see. He said quietly, "Let her through." The bodyguard stepped back. Elena walked the remaining 15 feet. She stopped in front of Damien Valenti, the most feared man in America, who was sitting very still in his wheelchair with his hands in his lap and 600 people watching from behind, and she said, in a voice that was low enough that it wouldn't carry but clear enough that he heard every word, "I know this is an absolutely insane thing to do. I know that, and I know you don't know me. But I've sat where you are. Not literally. I mean, I've been in a moment like this. And I know what it feels like when everyone in the room is waiting for you to fall apart." She paused. "Would you honor me with this dance?" The silence in the cathedral was so complete that the air itself seemed to hold. Damien looked at her for a long moment. His expression didn't change in any way that anyone watching from a distance could have described or named, but something shifted in his eyes, some minute adjustment, the way a room changes when a window is opened somewhere out of sight. He said, "I'm in a wheelchair." "I know," Elena said. "My brother was too." Another silence. "You know this will be photographed," he said. "I know. And written about." "I know that too." He studied her face. She held still under it. She didn't look away. "Why?" he said. She thought about it for a moment, not performing the thinking, actually doing it, the way people do when a question deserves a real answer instead of a reflex. "Because nobody should have to face humiliation alone," she said, "and because you haven't done anything wrong." The second sentence seemed to land somewhere unexpected. He blinked once, the first involuntary thing she'd seen him do. Then Damien Valenti extended his right hand. Elena took it. She placed her left hand on the arm of his wheelchair and began to move, slowly, without music, because the organist had gone completely silent along with everyone else. And Damien moved the wheelchair forward with his right hand while she walked alongside him. And together they made their way down the center aisle of the cathedral while 600 people watched in absolute silence. It was not graceful. She was not a professional dancer. He was not built for this kind of display. But it was something, and the something it was defied easy description. It was two people moving through a hard moment together. That was all. That was everything. By the time they reached the back of the cathedral, 3 people were crying openly. Marco Fieri, in the third pew, was looking at his shoes. Outside, a photographer who had been hired for the wedding pressed himself against the stone archway and raised his camera with hands that were shaking slightly. Damien and Elena stopped at the back of the nave. He released her hand. She stepped back slightly, giving him space. "Thank you," he said. "You don't have to thank me." "I know," he said. "I'm doing it anyway." He looked at her for another moment. "Elena," he said. She was surprised he knew her name, then remembered that this was a man whose organization had vetted every person in the building down to their employment history. "Yes," she said. "Stay close," he said, "until this is over." She nodded. What happened next took 40 minutes and proceeded with the controlled efficiency that Damien's organization always executed in the aftermath of an unexpected event. The guests were released in groups of 50, each guided out by security staff who communicated through earpieces with Coyle, who stood in the center of the side vestibule, managing everything with the calm of someone who had trained for exactly this kind of scenario. The officiant was escorted out through a back entrance. The catering staff, Elena's colleagues, were told that the event had been canceled due to a family matter and that they would receive full payment plus a cancellation fee. Elena stood near the side pillar and watched all of this happen. Nobody spoke to her. A few people looked at her, the looks ranging from curious to something approaching reverence, which made her deeply uncomfortable, because she understood that what she'd done was being processed by these people as something larger than it had been in the moment. In the moment, it had just been one human being walking toward another human being in a bad situation. Damien managed the dissolution of his own wedding with the same unreadable efficiency that he brought to everything. He said very little. He shook hands with certain men and exchanged brief words with others. He accepted acknowledgments with a nod and dismissed sympathy with something that wasn't quite dismissal, but wasn't engagement either, a very specific neutrality that communicated both that he was fine and that the subject was closed. Nobody mentioned Vivian DeLuca by name, not in front of him. When the cathedral was empty except for security personnel and the cleaning crew, Coyle came to stand beside Elena and said, without preamble, "Mr. Valenti would like to speak with you privately. Tonight, if you're available." Elena looked at him. "He's asking or telling?" Coyle took a moment. "Asking," he said. "Okay," Elena said. She was taken downstairs to retrieve her bag and jacket from the staff area. One of the catering managers, a nervous man named Phil, who had been sweating through his shirt since 11:45, tried to say something to her about professional conduct and the terms of employment, but stopped mid-sentence when one of Damien's men appeared at his shoulder and said quietly that Ms. Mercer had been reassigned for the remainder of the day. Phil did not say anything else. In the car, a black sedan with tinted windows and the particular interior silence of very good sound insulation, Elena sat in the back and looked out at Manhattan moving past the glass and tried to understand what she had done and why she had done it, and whether those two things were, in fact, the same question or two entirely different questions. She kept coming back to Marcus. Her brother had been 26 when the accident happened. A construction site, a scaffolding failure, 40 feet in 2 seconds. He'd survived everything that the impact should have killed him for, and had come out the other side with a spinal cord injury that left him without movement or sensation below his mid-chest. He had been a man who defined himself by his physical capability, not in a vain way, but in the specific way that people who have worked with their bodies their whole lives internalize physical presence as self. Climbing, lifting, building. That had been Marcus. That had been how he understood himself in the world. In the 6 months after the accident, she had watched him try and fail to locate himself outside that understanding. She had sat with him through the failures, the rage, the silence, the nights when he wouldn't eat, the weeks when he refused to see anyone, including her. She had learned slowly and painfully how to be present without being intrusive, how to offer without hovering, how to let him be angry without taking the anger personally or trying to fix it. She had also driven him, twice a week for 2 years, to an adaptive movement program at a community center in the Bronx, run by a physical therapist named Claudia, who understood that the body's relationship to space doesn't disappear with injury, it just reconfigures. And she had watched Marcus, over those 2 years, find his way back, not to who he had been, to who he was becoming. He had died 3 years ago from a cardiac event unrelated to the injury. He was 34, the age Elena was now. She thought about that sometimes. The sedan pulled through iron gates that swung open without anyone visible operating them and proceeded up a long driveway bordered by trees that had been planted with a precision that suggested professional landscaping and also, Elena thought, a certain desire for privacy. The estate at the end of the driveway was large, in the specific way of old money. Not ostentatious, but simply significant, built from stone that had aged into a color between gray and brown, surrounded by grounds that were maintained with obsessive care. Inside, she was shown to a sitting room with high ceilings and windows that looked out over a garden where nothing was currently blooming. She was offered tea, which she accepted because she was cold and her hands needed something to do. The tea came in a proper cup and saucer, brought by a woman who said nothing and moved through the room without seeming to occupy any space. She sat and drank the tea and waited. Damien came in 15 minutes later. Without the backdrop of the cathedral, he seemed, paradoxically, both more and less imposing. The wheelchair moved across the room with the quiet efficiency of someone who had stopped thinking about moving the wheelchair decades ago, for whom it was as unconscious as walking. He positioned himself across from her and looked at her directly, as he had in the cathedral, with that particular quality of attention that she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at things he wanted to understand. "I owe you an explanation," he said. "You don't," she said. "An apology, then." "For what?" He paused. "I put you in a position—" "You didn't put me in anything," she said. "I walked up that aisle. That was my choice." He studied her. "Why?" "I already told you why." "Tell me again." She set down the tea. She thought about how to say it accurately, not the version she might have said if she'd been performing the story for someone, but the actual version. "My brother was in a wheelchair for 8 years," she said, "after his accident. And I watched people treat him like he had become less of a person. Not always intentionally. Sometimes it was just the way they looked at him, or didn't look at him, or the way they talked to whoever was with him instead of talking to him directly." She paused. "Today, in there, the way those people were looking at you, waiting to see how badly you were going to fall apart, it looked familiar, that's all." Damien was quiet for a moment. "Your brother," he said. "What was his name?" She was surprised by the question. "Marcus. And he died 3 years ago, cardiac, not related to the injury." "I'm sorry." "Thank you," she said, and meant it in the uncomplicated way she'd learned to mean it after 3 years of practice. Damien's hands moved to the wheels of his chair, not to move it anywhere but the way hands move when they need something small to do. "The woman who didn't come today," he said. Elena waited. "Her name is Vivian. We were engaged for 14 months. He said this with a flatness that was not indifference, but something more controlled than indifference. The flatness of someone who has already done whatever emotional processing they're capable of in the time available and is now operating from a position of functional clarity. "I don't know yet whether she left because she wanted to or because she was told to. That distinction matters." "It matters to you emotionally?" Elena said. "Or it matters practically?" He looked at her with something that might have been, in a different context, amusement. "Both," he said. "But right now, practically." Elena nodded. She understood that. "What I do know," he said, "is that there are people inside my organization who knew this was going to happen. Not just Vivian's choice, whatever that was, but the timing, the cameras going down, the public nature of it. This was a message." He paused. "Someone paid for that message to be delivered in the most humiliating way possible." "And you want to understand who," Elena said. "I want to understand everything," he said. "That's always been my particular problem." They sat in silence for a moment. It wasn't uncomfortable. It was the kind of silence that forms when two people who don't know each other discover they can occupy the same space without performing. "What do you actually do," he said, "when you're not walking up the aisles of strangers' weddings?" She almost laughed. "Almost. I cater events. I also—" She stopped. "I run an adaptive movement program. Volunteer. At a community center in Brooklyn. For people with spinal injuries mostly. A few other conditions." He was very still. "Like the one your brother went to." "Like the one my brother went to," she said. "Actually the same program. Different city, different building, same model." He He looked at her with an expression that had changed slightly in a way she couldn't immediately categorize. Not softened, exactly. Become more specific. "You've been doing this for how long?" he said. "The program? 5 years? The catering is that's just money. The program is—" She stopped again. She didn't usually explain this to people she'd known for 2 hours. "It's where I put everything I learned with Marcus, that's all. I didn't want it to just be grief." The silence that followed that was different from the previous one. It had weight. "Elena," he said. "Yes." "I'd like you to stay for dinner." She looked at him. "That's a significant ask for someone you met 3 hours ago in the middle of what was probably the worst day of your life." "It might be," he said. "Are you refusing?" She thought about it. She thought about what the right answer was from a practical standpoint, from a personal safety standpoint, from the standpoint of her regular life and her regular choices, and the version of herself that operated according to reasonable caution. She thought about all of that. "No," she said. Dinner was in a room that looked out over the darkened garden, served by the same silent woman who had brought the tea, with food that was simple enough to communicate a specific kind of confidence. People who know their own quality don't need to perform it. Damien ate without ceremony and without much appetite, which Elena understood and didn't comment on. She wasn't particularly hungry either, but she ate because the food was good and because eating gave the conversation places to breathe. They talked about Marcus. Damien asked questions, real questions, the kind that required answers rather than the kind that create the appearance of interest, about the accident, the recovery, the program. He asked about the specific exercises involved in adaptive movement, about what the research said regarding neuroplasticity and the body's capacity to find new pathways. He asked because he wanted to know. Elena answered because she knew, and because it was unusual and unexpectedly pleasant to have someone be genuinely curious about the things she'd spent 5 years learning. She asked him about the attack, 18 years ago. She asked directly, without softening it, because she sensed that he responded better to directness than to careful circling, and she was right. He told her what he told very few people, not the operational details, which she didn't ask about, but the specific experience of waking up in a hospital room and understanding, before anyone said anything, what was different. The quality of that understanding. What he had built in the years since, not just the empire, the thing underneath the empire that required a different kind of construction. "You rebuilt your identity," she said. "I rebuilt it around the wrong things for a long time," he said. "Power, control, making sure no one could ever get close enough to do that kind of damage again." "And Vivian?" Elena said. She kept her voice neutral. She wanted to know, but she wasn't performing wanting to know. He was quiet. "I thought she was something she wasn't," he said. "Or I made her into something she wasn't. I'm not sure yet which is true." "The distinction matters," Elena said. "To you emotionally and practically." He looked at her. This time, what might have been amusement definitely was. After dinner, Elena stood to leave. One of Damien's men would drive her home. This had been arranged without discussion, simply presented as the plan. She accepted it because it was late, and she was tired in the particular way of someone who has been emotionally present at very high intensity for many hours. At the door, Damien said, "The program you run, who funds it?" "I do," she said. "What I can. And a few small grants." She paused. "It's not enough. It's never enough." He nodded slowly. He was thinking about something. She could see the thinking, though not its content. "I'll call you," he said. "You don't have my number," she said. "I have your employment file," he said. "I have everything." She looked at him. There was something she should probably feel about that. Some version of discomfort, some reasonable wariness. What she actually felt was complicated, which she filed away to think about later. "Good night, Mr. Valenti," she said. "Damien," he said. She almost said it. She stopped herself. "Good night," she said. In the car heading back to Brooklyn, she pressed her forehead against the cool glass of the window and watched the city lights blur past and thought about the specific look on Damien Valenti's face when she'd said Marcus's name. The way something had moved behind those pale gray eyes. The way a man who had spent decades learning not to be visible to other people had been, for just a moment, visible. She thought about what Coyle had said to Damien in the cathedral. She hadn't been able to hear the words, but she'd been close enough to read Coyle's body in the moment after. The particular set of his shoulders, the way he'd held the second of silence before nodding and walking away. That wasn't the body language of a man who had delivered news about a runaway bride. That was the body language of a man who had delivered news about a threat. She didn't know what she was walking into. She understood that she didn't know. But there had been a moment in that sitting room over the second cup of tea that had appeared without anyone asking, when Damien Valenti had looked at her with something she recognized, something she'd seen in Marcus's face in the second year of the program, when the work had started to mean something again, and she'd thought, this man has been alone inside this for a very long time. She pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window. The car moved through the city, carrying her back toward her regular life, which she already understood was not going to remain entirely regular. 3 days later, her phone rang at 7 in the morning. Unknown number. She answered it because she was already awake and because she'd been waiting for it, though she hadn't admitted that to herself until the moment she heard his voice. There are things happening, Damien said without introduction. Things that started before the wedding. I want you to understand what you've stepped into. I stepped into a cathedral, Elena said, to ask a man to dance. That's not all you stepped into, he said, and I think you know that. She was quiet for a moment. She was standing at her kitchen window, holding the phone with both hands, looking at the street below where the morning was starting up in the ordinary way of mornings. People walking dogs, a bodega opening its gate, someone's kid being pulled toward school. Tell me, she said. The silence on the other end lasted exactly 3 seconds. Vivian didn't leave on her own, he said. She was helped. And the people who helped her, they're not finished. The first thing Damien said after that 3-second silence was not an explanation. It was an address. Come to the estate, not tonight. Tomorrow morning, 7 o'clock. A pause. Bring nothing. Tell no one. The line went dead before Elena could respond. She stood at her kitchen window for a long time after that, phone still pressed against her palm, watching the bodega owner across the street drag a produce display onto the sidewalk with the unhurried efficiency of a man who had done the same thing every morning for 20 years. The ordinary texture of the world outside the glass felt, in that moment, like something she was looking at through the wrong end of a telescope. Present, but distant. Real, but no longer entirely hers. She made coffee. She drank half of it. She thought about calling someone, her friend Dara, who worked nights at a hospital in Queens and would be awake, who had a talent for cutting through complicated situations with the kind of blunt accuracy that Elena usually valued and occasionally resented. She thought about what she would say. She thought about how it would sound. She put the phone face down on the counter. At 6:15 the next morning, she was in a car service heading toward the Valenti estate, wearing jeans and a gray sweater and the same boots she wore to the program twice a week, because she had decided the night before that she was not going to dress for this meeting the way one dressed to impress someone. She was going to dress like herself. If that was insufficient, she would learn something useful. The gates opened as the car pulled up to them. Someone had been watching for her. Coyle met her at the front door. Not a staff member, Coyle himself, which told her something about the register of the morning. He was wearing what she suspected was his standard configuration. Dark suit, no tie, expression that processed the world in terms of vectors and threats, and things that were neither. He said, "Ms. Mercer," and stepped back from the door, and she went in. Damien was in a room she hadn't been in before, a large, functionally spare space that appeared to be an operational center of some kind, though the word office was inadequate for it. 3 walls carried screens. A long table ran the length of the room, currently covered in documents, photographs, printed communications, and what appeared to be financial records. 2 men she didn't recognize stood at the far end of the table and looked at her when she came in with the specific alertness of people trained to assess unfamiliar elements. Damien was positioned at the near end of the table, in front of a screen that displayed a dense tangle of financial data. He was wearing a dark shirt, no jacket, and he looked like a man who hadn't slept, which was different from the unreadable composure of 2 days ago in a way she couldn't immediately articulate. Tighter, more wired, like something was running very fast underneath the controlled surface. "Close the door," he said. Coyle closed it from the inside. He remained in the room. Elena walked to the table and looked at the screen without touching anything. The data meant nothing to her at this scale. Numbers and dates and account codes threading through each other in patterns she couldn't parse. "What am I looking at?" she said. 14 months, Damien said. "That's how long this has been running." She looked at him. "What has?" He moved the wheelchair slightly to his left, positioning himself in front of a different section of the display. "Victor DeLuca, Vivian's uncle. He managed the financial infrastructure for 3 of my operations: money movement, account management, distribution of assets through legitimate business fronts." He said this with the same flatness he used for everything, but there was something underneath it now that hadn't been there 2 days ago. Something that wanted to be anger and had been compressed into something more dangerous. "What my people have found in the last 72 hours is that Victor has been using that access to redirect funds, slowly, carefully. Over 14 months, he's moved approximately $63 million out of Valenti accounts and into a network of entities that trace back to our competitors." Elena was quiet for a moment. "The DeLuca family sent their money to your enemies. Victor DeLuca specifically. The family is complicated." He paused. The pause had texture. "Vivian may not have known the full extent of it." "You're protecting her," Elena said. Not an accusation, an observation. His jaw tightened slightly. "I'm being accurate." "Those two things aren't the same." He looked at her. The look lasted long enough to become something other than a casual exchange. "No," he said, finally. "They're not." She looked back at the screen. "Who are the 2 men at the end of the table?" "Analysts. They've been up since Monday." She glanced at them. They both looked like they'd been up since a Monday several years ago. "What do you need from me, specifically?" Damien moved to the table and picked up a photograph. He held it toward her without extending his arm far enough to be dramatic about it. A practical gesture. "Here's a thing. Look at this thing." Elena took it. It was a surveillance photograph, slightly grainy, the kind taken at a distance with a lens that was doing its best. It showed 2 men at a restaurant table. One of them she didn't recognize. The other... She looked up. "That's from the wedding." "That's Marco Fieri," Damien said. "He runs my New York operation. Has for 11 years. He was in the 3rd pew," she said. "He leaned over and said something to the man next to him right after..." She stopped. "Right after Coyle told me," Damien said. "Yes." He took the photograph back. "The man he was talking to is Caruso, Philadelphia. What's relevant is that photograph was taken 18 days before the wedding. Marco Fieri and a man named Reeves, the one you don't recognize, having lunch at a restaurant in Hoboken that Reeves has no legitimate reason to be in and Marco has no legitimate reason to be at." "Who is Reeves?" "He manages Victor DeLuca's American accounts." The silence that followed was the kind that forms when the shape of something becomes clear enough to see, but not yet clear enough to be certain of. "You think Marco knew," Elena said. "I think Marco was part of it," Damien said. "I think there are others. I don't know yet how many or how deep." She set down the photograph on the table. Carefully, as if it was a thing that needed to be handled with some care, though it was just paper. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you asked." "I asked what I was looking at," she said. "I didn't ask for the operational briefing." He was quiet for a moment. The 2 analysts at the far end of the table were doing an excellent job of appearing to look at their screens. Coyle was looking at the middle distance with the studied neutrality of a man who was absolutely listening. "Because I want you to understand the context," Damien said, "before I ask you something." "Ask." He turned back to the main screen. "The gala. My annual charity event. It's in 3 weeks. Already scheduled, already announced, already expected. Canceling it reads as collapse. Going forward with it reads as strength," Elena said. "Control," he said. "There's a difference." A pause. "I want to invite everyone, every family, every rival, every person who was in that cathedral. Victor DeLuca and Vivian, every political contact, every judge, every journalist who covered the story. I want them all in a room." Elena looked at him. And do what? End it, he said. All of it, at once. She was quiet for a long time, long enough that one of the analysts at the far end of the table shifted slightly in his seat. That's a very large risk, she said. Yes. If it goes wrong, it won't. You don't know that. No, he said. I don't. He looked at her directly. I want you there. She stared at him. Why? Because you're the only person in my immediate orbit right now who I can verify has no stake in any of this. I'm a caterer, she said. I run a volunteer program for spinal injury patients. I know what you are, he said. And the way he said it, not dismissively, not flattering either, just level and direct, made her stop arguing for a moment. I know exactly what you are. That's why. She looked at the screen. She looked at the photograph on the table. She looked at Coyle, who was still examining the middle distance, and at the two analysts who were definitely not looking at her. She looked at Damien, who was watching her with the particular patience of someone who has learned to wait without performing waiting. I have a Tuesday session, she said, at the program. I know your schedule, he said. Stop knowing my schedule, she said. Tell me when you're free, he said. Something in her chest did a complicated thing that she chose not to examine. I'm free on Thursdays, she said. We can talk about the gala on Thursday. He nodded. Thursday. She picked up her bag from where she'd set it on the floor. Is that everything? For now, he said. She walked to the door. Coyle opened it without her touching it, which she was beginning to understand was just how doors worked in this building. Elena, Damien said. She stopped. The program you run, he said. How many people are currently enrolled? She turned slightly. 32. We have a wait list of 14. What do you need to expand? Funding, she said. Space, a proper facility. He nodded once, like he was noting something down somewhere inside himself. Thursday, he said. She left. In the car back to Brooklyn, she pressed her hands flat against her thighs and stared at the back of the driver's headrest and thought very precisely and deliberately about nothing. This was a skill she had developed during the difficult years with Marcus. The ability to suspend processing for the duration of a transit, to give the brain a window of blankness so it didn't collapse under the weight of too many variables at once. It worked for approximately 4 minutes. Then her brain resumed at full volume. The Thursday meeting didn't happen the way either of them had planned. On Wednesday morning at 10:42, Coyle called her number. Not Damien. Coyle. She had his number now, which meant he had hers, which meant a kind of threshold had been crossed that she was no longer in a position to uncross. There's been a development, Coyle said. Mr. Valenti would like to move the meeting to this afternoon. I have a session at 2, she said. The session can be covered. By who? She said. My volunteers aren't interchangeable. These people have relationships with specific facilitators, specific... Ms. Mercer, Coyle said. I understand. I'm not asking you to cancel the session. I'm asking if you're available at 5. A pause. Fine, she said. 5. Yep, She ran her 2 o'clock session and thought about Marco Fieri the entire time, which meant she wasn't as present as she should have been, and noticed this halfway through and corrected for it, and felt guilty about the first half anyway. The session was with a group of 8, ranging from a 23-year-old who'd been injured 6 months ago and was still in the raw early stage where everything felt like loss, to a 50-something man named Bernard who had been coming for 3 years and moved with a confidence through space that had taken most of those 3 years to develop. She watched Bernard demonstrate something to the younger man, a specific technique for weight distribution and momentum, and felt the familiar ache of it, the particular mix of grief and hope that the program always produced in her, which was why she kept doing it. At 4:15, she got in another black car that had appeared outside the community center without any specific arrangement she'd made, which she was beginning to accept as a feature of the new shape of her days. The estate felt different in the late afternoon. The light was lower and harder, coming at angles through the trees, and the grounds had a particular stillness that reminded her of the period just before the weather changes. The air, knowing something was coming before the sky showed it. Coyle met her at the door again. This time he didn't take her to the operational room. He took her to a smaller room off the main corridor, a room with 2 chairs and a table and a window, and nothing else that seemed to serve any particular function, which made her think it was probably used for exactly this kind of meeting, conversations that needed containment. Damien was already there. He was positioned beside the window, facing the door, and his expression when she came in was different from anything she'd seen before. Not the controlled flatness of the cathedral, not the contained intensity of the operational room. Something more complicated and less managed, like something had happened between this morning and this afternoon that had moved him past the place where management was entirely possible. She sat down. He didn't move from the window. "What happened?" she said. "Marco came to see me this morning," he said. She waited. "He told me he had information about Victor, about the financial transfers. He said he'd discovered it recently and hadn't known how to bring it to me, given everything that happened with Vivian." Damien paused. His hands were on the wheels of his chair, not moving. He presented it as loyalty, coming forward, protecting the organization. "But," Elena said. "But he was lying," Damien said. "And the particular way he was lying is what I need you to understand." She was quiet. "Marco knew about the transfers 14 months ago," Damien said. "Not because he discovered them, because he helped design them." He turned from the window. His face, in the afternoon light, looked like something that had been through a very long time and was deciding whether or not to show it. "He came to me this morning to confess to something smaller before something larger could surface. He wanted to control the version of the story I'd receive." "Did he know you already knew?" Elena said. "He suspected," Damien said. "He wasn't certain. He was managing his risk." A pause. "He's been doing this for 18 years. The number landed in the room with weight. 18 years, Elena said. "Since before the attack," Damien said. "Since before the wheelchair, since before any of this." She understood then, at least partly, what the expression on his face was. It wasn't anger. It was something older and more exhausting than anger. It was the specific devastation of discovering that something you built your life on was hollow from the beginning, that the foundation you'd been standing on, or in his case not standing on, had been compromised before you'd laid the first stone. "He was there during the attack," she said. "He survived it," Damien said. "He was 2 cars back. The car I was in was the only one hit." He stopped. "I spent years trying to find out who ordered it. I had 3 names by the end of the first year. I had 2 confirmed by the end of the second. The third was always—" He stopped again. "I never closed it." "You think Marco was the third," Elena said. He didn't answer directly. He moved the wheelchair to the table and positioned himself across from her with the careful precision that told her, after enough time in his presence to read it, that he was controlling his body because his body wanted to do something else, wanted the kind of motion that the chair didn't allow, the physical expression of an internal state that had nowhere to go. "I don't know," he said, "and not knowing is—" He stopped. "Worse," she said. "Yes," he said, "worse." She leaned forward slightly, elbows on the table. "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to let him believe he succeeded," Damien said. "I'm going to let him think I accepted his version, and I'm going to keep him close until the gala." "And at the gala?" "At the gala," Damien said, "I'm going to take everything from him in front of everyone who matters." The quietness in the room was the quietness of an irreversible decision. Elena sat with it. She was not someone who filled silences reflexively. Marcus had cured her of that years ago, in the specific way that sitting with someone through very long silences will cure you of the habit of rushing to end them. "Is he dangerous?" she said. "Between now and then?" "He's careful," Damien said. "Careful men do dangerous things when they feel cornered. I'm not going to corner him until I'm ready." "And the others? The ones inside your organization who knew?" "I'm identifying them," he said. "It takes time to do it correctly. Incorrectly, it just creates noise." She nodded. She was quiet for a moment. "Why did you need me here for this? You could have told me Thursday." He looked at her. The afternoon light had shifted while they'd been talking. It came now from a lower angle, catching the side of his face in a way that exposed the lines that his usual positioning tended to shadow. He looked, in that light, exactly as old as he was, not in a diminished way, in the way that age looks on someone who has not tried to evade it. "I needed to tell someone," he said, "who wasn't inside it." She held his gaze. "I'm honored," she said. And she was. That was the complicated part. "Don't be," he said. "It's selfish." "Most honest things are," she said. In the second week after that conversation, Elena's life split along a fault line she hadn't expected and couldn't have prepared for. On one side of the line, the Tuesday and Thursday sessions at the program, the grant application she'd been building for 18 months, the quiet routine of her apartment in Brooklyn, the 3 people she'd call a friend if pressed, the specific way her mornings worked. On the other side, a series of phone calls with Damien that grew longer and started earlier in the morning. An invitation to the estate on a Saturday afternoon that turned into 7 hours and dinner again, though this time she brought the food herself. A container of congee she'd made the night before because she'd been thinking about what Marcus used to eat when he wasn't eating well, and she thought, she didn't examine why she thought this, that Damien might not be eating well. He had looked at the container with an expression she couldn't categorize. "You brought food," he said. "Congee," she said. It's just food. Don't make it into something." "I'm not making it into anything." "You're looking at it." "I'm allowed to look at things," he said. They ate it at the kitchen table, which was apparently a room nobody used, because the staff member who came to bring water stopped in the doorway with an expression of genuine confusion before composing herself and withdrawing. Damien told her about his mother. She hadn't asked. He offered it, which she understood meant something, because he was not a man who offered things without deciding to. His mother had been a woman from Naples who had arrived in New York at 22 and spent 40 years building something from nothing in a city that made building from nothing its central mythology. She had died when Damien was 33. Before the attack, before the wheelchair, before the empire had reached the scale it eventually reached. He was grateful for that, he said, that she hadn't seen the specific shape the empire had taken. "She knew what you were," Elena said. "She knew what I was becoming," he said. "There's a difference." "You keep making that distinction," Elena said. "It keeps mattering," he said. She told him about her father, who had left when Marcus was 7 and she was 9, and who had not been particularly missed, not because he was irredeemably bad, but because his absence was simply a fact of the house, like the way the kitchen window didn't close all the way. You learned to work around it. What she missed was the idea of him, the specific version of him that she'd constructed at age 9, before understanding that the construction was all hers. Damien listened to this without interjecting. He was a remarkably good listener, which she hadn't expected, which she thought she should have expected, because people who operated at his level of complexity needed to receive information accurately, and that required actual listening. But the quality of his attention was different from professional attention. It was the kind of listening that made you aware that whatever you were saying was landing somewhere, being received, actually mattering to the person across the table. She thought about that on the drive home. She thought about it more than she wanted to. On the Monday of the 3rd week, things accelerated in a way that Damien had anticipated and Elena had not. She was at the community center, an hour before her session, sitting in the small room they used as an office and working on the grant application on her laptop when her phone rang with a number she didn't recognize. She answered it out of the habit of answering unknown numbers that she'd developed since all of this had started. The voice on the other end was a woman's. "Ms. Mercer," she said, "my name is Vivian DeLuca." Elena was very still. "I know who you are," Vivian said. "I've seen the photographs from the cathedral. Everyone has." A pause. "I need to speak with you, not Damien, you." "Why?" Elena said. Not hostile, just direct. "Because I don't know if I can trust him," Vivian said, "and I need to trust someone. And you—" A pause that had the texture of someone choosing words with significant care. "You walked up that aisle for no reason except that it was the right thing to do. I've been trying to remember the last time someone did something purely because it was right, and I keep coming up empty." Elena closed her laptop. "Where are you?" she said. New Jersey, Vivian said. I can be in Brooklyn in 40 minutes. Elena was quiet for exactly the length of time it took her to decide. There's a coffee shop on Court Street, she said. Blue awning. I'll be there at 4. She called Damien immediately after. She told him everything, the call, the name, the time, and location. She did not ask his permission. Don't go, he said. His voice had gone very flat. I'm going, she said. Elena? She called me, Elena said. Not you. That means something. A pause. I'll tell you everything afterward. You shouldn't go alone. I am going alone, Elena said. If you have someone follow me, I will know, and that will be the end of this. Whatever this is. Silence. Damien, she said, I'll know within 6 minutes if anything happens to you, he said. That's not surveillance, that's... I know what it is, she said. Don't. She heard him exhale. One exhale, controlled. Call me when you leave the coffee shop, he said. Yes, she said. At 4 o'clock, she was sitting at a corner table in the coffee shop on Court Street when the door opened and Vivian DeLuca walked in. She was not what Elena had expected. She understood, intellectually, that she'd had no specific expectation, but the absence of one still registered as a kind of gap when confronted with the actual person. Vivian DeLuca was 38 years old, tall, with dark hair worn down and a face that was structured and striking in a way that made you look twice and then look away, because the expression it was currently carrying was the expression of someone who was holding themselves together through a deliberate act of will and was aware of how tenuous that act was. She sat down across from Elena without ordering anything. Thank you for coming, she said. You should order something, Elena said. You'll look less like you're about to confess something. Vivian looked at her. Then, unexpectedly, she almost smiled. It was a partial thing, almost immediately pulled back. You're direct, she said. Generally, Elena said. Vivian ordered an espresso she probably didn't need and wrapped both hands around it when it came, as if the warmth was the actual point. I didn't know about the money, Vivian said. I want to say that first. I know it sounds like exactly what someone who knew about it would say. I understand that. But I didn't know about the transfers, the accounts, the amounts. I didn't know the extent of what my uncle had been doing. What did you know? Elena said. Vivian looked at her cup. I knew Victor didn't want me to marry Damien. I knew he thought the marriage would give Damien too much visibility into the DeLuca finances. A pause. I knew he had a plan to stop the wedding. I believed it was just about the marriage, about protecting the family's separate interests. She looked up. He told me there would be a financial dispute, a negotiation. He said if I left before the ceremony, it would give him leverage to renegotiate the terms. He told you to leave your own wedding, Elena said. He told me it would save the family. Vivian said it with the particular flatness of someone who has been saying a thing to themselves many times and has stopped hearing it. I believed him because... She stopped. Because he's been telling me what would save the family my entire life, and I have been believing him my entire life. And I am 38 years old, and I am only now understanding that the family he was saving was always just himself. Elena was quiet for a moment. The coffee shop was filling up around them, the post-4 o'clock crowd, people stopping in on the way from somewhere to somewhere else, the ordinary movement of afternoon. What do you want? Elena said. I want to tell Damien what I know, Vivian said. All of it. The conversations with Victor, the timeline, what he told me, what I understood, what I should have understood and didn't. She paused. But I need to know he's not going to... She stopped. He's not going to hurt you, Elena said. You can't know that. I know it, Elena said. Not because he's a good man in all the ways that matter, but because hurting you would be imprecise, and he doesn't do imprecise. Vivian looked at her. Something moved in her face. I also need, Vivian said carefully, his protection. Victor doesn't know I'm here. Victor doesn't know I've been questioning things. If he finds out I'm talking... He'll what? Elena said. Vivian looked at her steadily. Victor DeLuca does not tolerate the things he needs kept quiet talking out of turn, she said. I am one of the things he needs kept quiet. The words were quiet and certain, and landed in Elena's chest like cold water. She looked at Vivian DeLuca and understood that the woman across from her was genuinely frightened, not performing fright, not calculating with it. Frightened in the specific way of someone who has been inside something for so long that they forgot it was a trap and has only recently looked up and seen the walls. "I'll call him," Elena said. "Now?" "Now," Elena said. She took out her phone. Damien answered on the first ring. "She's here," Elena said. "She wants to talk. She has information about Victor, about the timeline. She's willing to give you all of it. She needs protection in exchange." A pause. "She's also," Elena said, keeping her voice even and her eyes on Vivian, "afraid for her safety. I believe her." Silence on the other end. Elena counted 3 seconds. "Tell her to come to the estate," Damien said. "Tonight, both of you." Elena lowered the phone and looked at Vivian. "Tonight," she said. "Both of us. You okay with that?" Vivian DeLuca looked at the espresso she hadn't touched, and then at Elena, and then at whatever she was looking at when she was looking inward at the architecture of her own choices. "Yes," she said. The drive to the estate in the early evening took 40 minutes through traffic that moved and stopped in the rhythm of the city, which Elena had always found either maddening or meditative depending on her state of mind. Tonight, it was meditative because her state of mind required it to be. She sat beside Vivian in the back of a car that had appeared on Court Street within 8 minutes of her call to Damien, which she noted and did not comment on. Vivian looked out the window the entire drive. She said, at one point, without looking away from the glass, "The photographs of you two, walking down the aisle." "I know," Elena said. "What were you thinking?" "I was thinking about my brother," Elena said. Vivian turned to look at her. "That's not what I expected you to say." "What did you expect?" Vivian was quiet for a moment. "I thought you might say you were thinking about Damien, about how he looked." "I was thinking about how he looked," Elena said. "And my brother looked the same way. Once. A long time ago." She paused. "That's what I was thinking about." Vivian turned back to the window. At the estate, Coyle met them at the door. He looked at Vivian with an expression that gave nothing away, which Elena had come to understand was different from the expression that gave nothing away because he felt nothing. This was the expression of a man who felt something and had chosen not to show it, which was a more complex configuration. Damien was in the operational room. He had changed from the morning, which meant he had thought about this moment and prepared for it in whatever way was available to him. He was wearing a dark jacket now, and his posture was the posture of someone who had reset themselves into the controlled configuration. Looking at him from the doorway, Elena could not see any evidence of what he'd told her about Marco, about the 18 years, about the third name he'd never been able to close. She looked for it anyway. It was there, if you knew where to look, in the specific set of his hands. Vivian stopped in the doorway for a moment. She and Damien looked at each other across the room in the particular silence of two people who have shared a significant history and are now standing in the wreckage of it, trying to locate the exits. Then Vivian walked to the table and sat down. "I'll tell you everything," she said. "From the beginning." She did. It took 2 hours. What emerged from those 2 hours was a map of a conspiracy that was more extensive and more carefully constructed than Damien's people had uncovered. Vivian knew the conversations, the specific language Victor had used, the sequence of decisions, and the reasoning behind each one. She knew names. She knew dates. She knew that certain communications had been routed through a specific attorney's office in the Cayman Islands. She knew that 2 of the betrayals inside Damien's organization went back not 14 months but 3 years, predating even Victor's direct involvement, that Victor had found existing weaknesses and exploited them rather than creating them from scratch. She knew who had been at the meeting where the plan for the wedding was finalized. She had been told about the meeting, the day after, as a fait accompli. She had not been asked, she had been told. At the end, the room was very quiet. Damien had said almost nothing for the last hour. He'd let Vivian talk and occasionally asked a question, short and specific, and listened to the answer with a quality of attention that Elena recognized from her own experience of being listened to by him and that she was fairly certain very few people had ever been on the receiving end of. Victor doesn't know you're here, he said. Finally. No, Vivian said. He'll notice soon. I know. I can protect you, Damien said. From tonight, if you want it. Vivian looked at him. Something moved through her face that was too complicated and too private for Elena to try to read. I know what that means, Vivian said. Being inside your protection. Yes, he said. You do. A pause. Is there another option? There's leaving the country, he said. Tonight, if necessary. I can arrange that. And the gala? Vivian said. He was quiet. I'll testify, Vivian said. At the gala. Whatever you need me to say, I'll say it publicly. I owe you that much. You don't owe me anything, Damien said. His voice was entirely level. That's not a transaction I'm interested in. She looked at him with something approaching surprise. Then why? Because Victor needs to be finished, Damien said. Not for me. For the next person he decides to sacrifice. The room held that. Elena had been sitting slightly to the side and slightly behind, at the edge of the conversation rather than the center of it. She'd understood that was her position for this particular exchange, but she'd been watching both of them, watching Damien hold still through a conversation that required him to sit across from the woman who had abandoned him in front of 600 people, and watching Vivian construct and deliver 2 hours of testimony with the careful precision of someone burning a bridge they've already understood needed burning. At 10:45, Coyle showed Vivian to a room on the upper floor of the estate. Damien's protection had already started. This was what that looked like in its most immediate form. A room. A door that locked from the inside. The understanding that the exterior was managed. Elena was putting on her jacket. Her bag was on the chair. Elena, Damien said. She stopped. He was looking at the table, at the notes his analysts had been taking during Vivian's testimony, at the emerging shape of everything. Marco's going to move, he said. Before the gala. When he realizes Vivian has come here, and he'll realize Victor will tell him, he's going to try to act first. What does acting first look like? She said. I don't know yet, he said. That's what worries me. She picked up her bag. She stood with it over her shoulder and looked at him. What do you need me to do? She said. He looked up from the table. The operational mask had come down slightly, or she'd learned to see through it enough that it amounted to the same thing. Underneath it, right now, at this hour, after this day, a man who was holding a very complicated structure together and was aware that it was going to get more complicated before it resolved. Be careful, he said. Until the gala. That's not very specific, she said. I know, he said. Damien, she said. Yes. If Marco is going to move, she said slowly, and you know it's coming but not when, you're not safe here. I'm always safe here. You were safe 14 months ago, she said, and the whole time someone inside your organization was, Elena, he said. I'm just saying. I know what you're saying, he said. The way he said it stopped her. Not because it was harsh, because it wasn't. It was very quiet and entirely present, and it carried, somehow, in those 5 words, the weight of everything she'd learned about him in the weeks since a cathedral, since a dance without music, since a conversation about Marcus that had turned into something neither of them had a clean name for yet. She didn't say anything else. She left the estate at 11:12. In the car, heading back through the dark city, she pulled out her phone and looked at it without calling anyone. She thought about Marco Fieri leaning into the ear of the man beside him in the third pew. She thought about Victor DeLuca designing a betrayal over 14 months with the patience of someone who had no particular urgency because he believed he was operating without consequence. She thought about Damien's hands, this evening, on the wheels of his chair. Still. Too still. The stillness of someone who was no longer managing their body unconsciously, but was managing it deliberately, which was a different thing entirely. Her phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. She opened it. 4 words. Stay away from him. She stared at it. Her hands, she realized, were completely steady. That surprised her. She'd expected fear. What she felt instead was something colder and more focused, something that sat behind the sternum and did not flinch. She typed back 1 word. No. She pressed send. Then she called Damien. He answered on the first ring. I just received a text, she said. Unknown number, 4 words. She read them. Silence on his end. Not the silence of surprise, the silence of a man who has just received the confirmation of something he'd been calculating the probability of. Forward it to Coyle, he said. Already done, she said. Damien? Yes. They know about me, she said. Yes, he said. Which means I'm already... Yes, he said. She looked out the window at the city moving past, at the lights, the bridges, the dark water she could see between buildings when the angle was right. Then there's no going back, she said. And Damien Valenti, on the other end of the line, in a room full of evidence and betrayal and the wreckage of 18 years of misplaced trust, said the only honest thing left to say. No, he said. There isn't, part 3, của kịch bản điện ảnh này được triển khai với động lượng 6.000 đến 6.500 tu. Bắt đầu trực tiếp từ điểm kết thúc của part 2, yêu cầu bắt đầu ngay lập tức từ điểm không còn đường lui của phần trước. Trọng tâm của phần này là bước ngoặt lớn, the twist, một sự thật kinh hoàng bị phơi bày hoặc một sự phản bội bất ngờ khiến toàn bộ kế hoạch của nhân vật chính bị phá hủy hoàn toàn. Duy trì giống văn mỹ thô ráp, giàu cảm xúc, không sáo rộng, hãy kể theo ngôi thứ 3, tập trung khai thác sự bàng hoàng, tuyệt vọng và những phản ứng tâm lý cực đoan của nhân vật khi đối mặt với thất bại. Hồi thoại phải sắc lạnh, mang tính chất thẩm vấn hoặc bộc phát sự phẫn nộ. Triển khai chi tiết từng phân cảnh, scene by scene, với nhịp điệu dồn dập, tuyệt đối không sử dụng gạch đầu giọng, tiêu đề phụ hay nhắc đến thực thể tôn giáo. Kết thúc phần 3 bằng một tình huống ngặt nghèo nhất, buộc nhân vật phải thay đổi hoàn toàn bản chất để tồn tại. Hãy trình bày trực tiếp trong tin nhắn, viết cực kỳ chi tiết từng cử chỉ nhỏ. Nếu đặt giới hạn phản hồi, hãy dừng lại ở một câu rạng rỡ để tôi ra lệnh viết tiếp nhằm giữ đồ sâu cho kịch bản lỏng tiếng. Chỉ dần bắt buộc. Đây là một câu chuyện điện ảnh hoàn toàn hư cấu nhằm mục đích giải trí, không dựa trên bất kỳ sự kiện hay nhân vật có thật nào. Lưu ý đặc biệt quan trọng. Nếu đạt đến giới hạn trả lời, không được dừng giữa câu, hãy viết nốt câu đó hoàn chỉnh không mở rộng nội dung. Show more part 3, the cost of truths. The text sat in her phone like something with mass. Elena stared at those 4 words. Stay away from him. The whole drive back to Brooklyn, not because she was afraid of them, but because she was trying to understand their specific weight. A warning had a texture. This one was not the texture of someone trying to protect her. This was the texture of someone who wanted her to understand that she had been noticed, cataloged, and filed under the category of things that could be used. She understood that distinction clearly. Marcus had taught her, without meaning to, that the people who wanted to harm you rarely told you directly. They told you sideways. They told you with the language of concern. She forwarded the screenshot to Coyle at 11:23 and put the phone face down on her lap. At 11:51, already inside her apartment with her coat still on and the lights off, she received a reply from Coyle. 3 words. Number was disposable. Then, 6 seconds later, a second message. Don't be alone tomorrow. She read it twice. She took off her coat. She turned on one light. She did not sleep much. The next morning arrived gray and wet, rain moving through Brooklyn in that low, sideways way it did in early spring, when it couldn't decide if it wanted to be serious about it or not. Elena was at her kitchen table at 6:15 with coffee and her laptop and the grant application she hadn't touched in 4 days, which needed to be submitted by Friday and was 60% complete, which meant it was 40% incomplete, which was not a position she was comfortable with under any circumstances, but was less comfortable with now when the rest of her life had developed significant competing urgency. She worked on it for an hour. She got 11 minutes of actual productivity out of that hour and spent the rest of it reading the same sentence repeatedly while her brain ran parallel operations she hadn't authorized. At 7:40, Damien called. Marco didn't come in this morning, he said. She set down the coffee. He usually comes in? Every Tuesday, 8 o'clock. He's been doing it for 11 years. A pause. He's not answering his phone. You think he knows? He knows something happened last night, Damien said. Whether he knows specifically about Vivian, I don't know yet. but he's moved off pattern, which means he's operating outside the structure he usually operates inside. What does that mean for you? It means the timeline has accelerated, Damien said. The gala is 9 days away. 9 days was enough time to prepare everything correctly. Without knowing where Marco is or what he's planning, 9 days might not be... Damien, she said. Yes. Can you move the gala up? Silence. She could hear him thinking, not literally, but the quality of the silence on his end had the texture of active calculation rather than passive waiting. Not without signaling that something is wrong, he said. Moving the date reads as panic. I need everyone in that room to believe they're walking into Damien Valenti's public humiliation. The moment any of them suspect it's a trap, they won't come, she said. They won't come, he confirmed. Then 9 days, she said. 9 days, he said. She looked at the grant application on her screen. 60%. I'll come in this afternoon, she said. 3 o'clock. You have a session, he said. It ends at 1:30, she said. I'll come after. A pause. You don't have to. I know I don't have to, she said. 3 o'clock. She heard something in the silence that followed. Not words. The negative space where words would have been if he'd been a different kind of man. She'd become, without entirely meaning to, fluent in those particular silences. 3 o'clock, he said. She closed the laptop. The grant application would have to wait until tonight. What she didn't know, sitting at her kitchen table in Brooklyn with rain moving sideways across the window and the city making its ordinary morning sounds below, was that 9 miles away in a building in Midtown Manhattan, Marco Fieri was sitting in a room he'd rented under a name that wasn't his and making a phone call that would, in ways she couldn't yet see, change the shape of everything. The session at the community center went the way sessions went when she was distracted and trying not to be. Technically correct, emotionally thinner than she wanted. She caught herself twice doing the things she'd identified in facilitators who were burning out, giving instruction without giving presence, running the program through its mechanics without bringing anything living to it. Both times she stopped, took a breath, came back to the room, to the specific person in front of her, to the actual moment. The 23-year-old, his name was Derek, she'd learned his name on the 3rd session, which was the session when he'd finally stopped looking at the floor the entire time, was working on something today that she could see was costing him. Not physical cost. The other kind. The kind that lived in the gap between who you'd been and who you were becoming, in the specific territory of learning to inhabit a body that had been fundamentally reconfigured. She stayed with him longer than the structure required. She didn't think about Marco Fieri for those 12 minutes. On the drive to the estate, she did. Coyle was waiting in the drive, which was different. He came to the car before it had fully stopped, which was more different, and his face had the configuration she'd learned to read as something having happened in the window between her leaving and arriving. What? She said, getting out. Inside, he said. The operational room held Damien and 2 people she'd seen in the estate before but never been introduced to. A woman in her 50s with the specific posture of someone who had spent decades in law enforcement or something adjacent to it, and a younger man with a laptop who was typing while he stood, which Elena found vaguely alarming as a habit. On the main screen, a grid of surveillance photographs. Damien looked at her when she came in and then looked back at the screen, which told her the situation had moved past the point of greeting. What happened? She said. Marco met with 2 people this morning, Damien said, at a location we weren't watching because we didn't know it existed until 40 minutes ago. He indicated the screen. These are the 2 people. She looked. The photographs were taken from a significant distance, rooftop level, she guessed, and showed 2 men flanking Marco Fieri at a table inside a window. One of the men was heavy-set, older, with the particular physical bearing of someone who had spent a very long time being physically imposing and had settled into it comfortably. The other was younger, thinner, and would have looked unremarkable in most contexts, except for the specific way he was leaning across the table toward Marco, with an intensity that read clearly even through the grainy long-lens photography. Who are they? Elena said. The older one is Saggio, Damien said. Enzo Saggio. He runs the northeastern coast for the Ricci organization. The younger one... He paused. The woman in her 50s spoke. Her voice was dry and uninflected, the voice of someone who delivered information as a professional function and had long since stripped the emotional register out of the delivery. The younger one is Luca Ferrante. He was, the director of financial operations for two of your shell corporations for the last 3 years. Elena looked at Damien. His expression told her before his words did. He's mine, Damien said. Or he was. He's been inside the Valenti organization for 3 years, and he's been running information to the Ricci family for a pause. We don't know how long. How far in is he? Elena said. Far enough that he has access to the documentation we were planning to use at the gala, Damien said. The room held that. Elena understood what it meant. She could see from the way Damien was holding himself, the too careful stillness, the hands that weren't moving at all, that he understood exactly what it meant and had been sitting with it for some portion of the last 40 minutes. He knows what you have, she said. He knows what we were planning to show, Damien said. The financial evidence, the account trail, the transfers. He's known about it because he helped build the archive. Then Victor knows, she said. Yes. And Marco knows. Yes. And the Ricci family knows. Yes, Damien said. She looked at the screen. She looked at the 3 figures at the table, frozen in the grainy surveillance photograph, leaning toward each other with the specific intensity of people building a plan. She thought about the specific shape of what that plan might be. Given that the thing you did when your opponent's evidence was compromised was not to run, it was to move first and move decisively while the opponent was recalibrating. They're going to act before the gala, she said. Before the end of the week, Coyle said from behind her. That's the assessment. Elena turned around. Coyle was standing at the edge of the room with his arms at his sides and his face in the neutral configuration, but his body had the quality of tension compressed by a long habit of professionalism. Why the end of the week? Because Victor DeLuca's attorney filed paperwork this morning, the woman in her 50s said. A preemptive financial disclosure, his own audit. If Victor submits it to the relevant federal oversight before we present at the gala, the financial evidence we have becomes legally complicated to use. She paused. His attorney is fast. The filing could be complete in 4 to 6 days. Elena looked at Damien. He was looking at the screen. She had learned, in the weeks of knowing him, that the particular quality of his stillness when something had genuinely landed, genuinely struck somewhere that required a moment to absorb, was different from the professional stillness he maintained as a default. It was more complete, more interior. Like the surface of him had gone perfectly flat, and all the motion had gone somewhere deep underneath where she couldn't see it. This was that stillness. The gala evidence, she said carefully, is it solid without the financial records? Parts of it, he said. The surveillance footage of Vivian's departure, that's solid. Victor's communications with the insiders, those are solid, though the chain of custody on some of them is complicated. The financial thread is what ties it together. Without it, you have pieces. With a competent attorney, Victor can argue each piece individually. And Vivian's testimony, Elena said. She's the granddaughter of the man who built the DeLuca organization, Damien said. In that room, with those people, her word against Victor's is not a guaranteed outcome. She heard the exhaustion in his voice. Not the ordinary kind, the specific exhaustion of a man who had been running intelligence against a threat that kept changing shape, who had planned for one configuration of the enemy and was now looking at a different configuration entirely. She crossed to the table and sat down, not because she'd decided something, but because she needed to think, and she thought better when she was still. What do you have? She said. Right now. What's unimpeachable? Damien looked at her. Walk me through it, she said. Forget the gala for a minute. Forget the presentation. What do you actually have that can't be challenged regardless of what Victor's attorney files or what Luca Ferrante has told the Ricci family? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the woman in her 50s. Reyes, he said. The woman, Reyes, moved to the table and began laying it out. It took 22 minutes. Elena listened to all of it without interrupting, and the picture that emerged was this. The surveillance footage existed in 3 independent copies, archived to locations that Ferrante had not had access to. Vivian's testimony had been recorded the previous night in video format, witnessed, and was in the possession of two people whose institutional independence from the Valenti organization was established and documented. And there was a third thing, something Reyes delivered last, with the particular neutrality of someone saving the most significant item for when the listener was ready to receive it. 18 years ago, Reyes said, the attack on Mr. Valenti's vehicle. The investigation that followed identified three principles. Two were confirmed. The third remained unknown. Elena looked at Damien. He was looking at Reyes. 6 weeks ago, Reyes continued, a forensic accountant working on the current investigation identified a payment made from a Cayman account to an individual in New Jersey, dated 11 days before the attack. The payment was for a consulting service that doesn't exist. She paused. The Cayman account traces back through 4 intermediary entities to a holding company that was dissolved 18 years ago. The holding company's registered director was Marco Fieri. The room went completely silent. Elena watched Damien's face. Nothing moved, not a muscle, not an eye. He was entirely still in a way that was no longer about control. It was what was on the other side of control, when the thing you'd been managing for 18 years became, in a single sentence, not a wound you were carrying, but a wound you finally had the name for. The director of the holding company was Marco Fieri. She did the calculation. Marco had been inside Damien's organization when the attack happened. Marco had survived the attack because he'd been 2 cars back. Marco had spent 18 years building an empire of trust inside the organization while simultaneously, she couldn't say this with certainty, but her brain was drawing the line, and the line was straight, simultaneously serving as the connection between Damien's enemies and everything they needed to know. You have documentation, she said to Reyes. 4 levels of documentation, Reyes said. Financial records, corporate registration, wire transfer confirmation, and a sworn statement from the forensic accountant attesting to the methodology. She looked at Damien. He was looking at his hands. Damien, she said. He didn't respond immediately. She waited. The room waited. Coyle, behind her, was absolutely motionless. When Damien looked up, his face had done something she'd never seen it do. Not broken. That wasn't the word. The professional architecture was still present, but something underneath it had shifted, like the ground itself had moved by some small but irrevocable amount, and the structure built on top of it was still standing, but was standing differently now. He was at the hospital, Damien said. I know, Coyle said quietly. He came every day, Damien said. For 3 weeks. He stopped. He told me he'd been 2 cars back, that he'd run to the car when he saw the smoke. He stopped again. I believed him because there was no reason not to believe him. A pause. There was never a reason not to believe him. Nobody said anything. Elena looked at Damien and thought about 18 years. She thought about what it meant to rebuild yourself around betrayal you didn't know was there. To build an entire architecture of power and survival and hard-won self-sufficiency on a foundation that had been cracked before you laid it. She thought about the specific cruelty of that. Not the attack itself, but the aftermath. The years of reconstruction, of Marcus's phrase coming back to her. You have to decide what to build when you can't go back to what you had. And Damien had built something. He had built something extraordinary and formidable and real. And the whole time, one of the men helping him build it had been the man who'd ensured the original destruction. How long has Reyes known about this? Elena said. Since this morning, Reyes said. The forensic accountant delivered the final documentation at 6:45. So Marco doesn't know you have it, Elena said. Marco doesn't know we have it, Damien said. His voice had returned to something more level now, not recovered. That wasn't what was happening. He had absorbed the blow and reorganized around it, which was different. But he knows the financial records are compromised through Ferrante. He thinks the Gala plan is falling apart. He thinks you're exposed, Elena said. He thinks I'm cornered, Damien said. He's waiting to see what a cornered man does. She looked at him across the table. Then show him, she said. He looked back at her. Not what a cornered man does, she said. Show him something else. The following 48 hours moved with the specific texture of controlled crisis. Not chaos, but the near-constant low-frequency hum of too many variables being managed simultaneously by too few people who could be trusted. Elena was at the estate by 7 each morning and stayed until late each night, not because she'd been asked to remain, but because leaving felt, each time she considered it, like something she wasn't willing to do. She ran her Tuesday session via video call from the estate's smaller sitting room, which required her to explain to her 8 participants that she was at a friend's house, which was technically accurate in a way that she found either reassuring or absurd depending on the hour. She did not think of Damien as a friend. She didn't think of him as anything she had a clean word for, which was its own kind of information. On the second morning, Vivian came down from her room for the first time since arriving and appeared in the kitchen at 7:15 while Elena was making coffee, in the way she'd learned to make it in the estate kitchen after the staff had, wordlessly and without instruction, stepped aside and let her. Vivian was wearing borrowed clothes, something plain and dark, and her hair was loose, and she looked like a person who had slept badly and intended to function anyway. "Is there enough for 2?" Vivian said. "Yes," Elena said. Vivian sat at the kitchen table and wrapped her hands around the cup when Elena set it in front of her, the same gesture she'd made with the espresso at the coffee shop in Brooklyn, which Elena was beginning to understand was Vivian's specific way of being cold that had nothing to do with temperature. "He hasn't spoken to me since the night I arrived," Vivian said. "He's occupied," Elena said. "I know." A pause. I'm not asking for him to. I understand what I did." She looked at the cup. "I'm asking you to understand that I knew exactly what I was walking away from. In the cathedral, I knew what I was doing to him in front of those people, and I did it anyway because Victor told me it was necessary." She looked up. "That's not a defense. I just want you to know I didn't think it was harmless." Elena sat down across from her. "Why did you love him?" she said. "Before. Was it real?" Vivian looked at her with the particular expression of someone being asked a question they've been asking themselves. "It was as real as I knew how to be," she said, "which isn't the same as real, I understand that. But it's what I had." A pause. He's not easy to love. He doesn't give you much to work with. He doesn't let you in the ways that make loving someone feel safe." She paused. "But there's this thing he does. When he's actually listening to you, when you have his actual attention, it feels like being the most important thing in a very large room." She stopped. "I got addicted to that. I thought that was love. I don't know anymore what I thought." Elena was quiet for a moment. "It might have been love," she said. "Those two things aren't mutually exclusive." Vivian looked at her. "You're more generous than I expected." "I'm not being generous," Elena said. "I'm being accurate." That afternoon at 3:47, Marco Fieri walked into the estate. Not breaking in, not forced entry. He arrived at the gate and was waved through because Damien had told Coyle to let him through when he came, and he had come, which meant he had decided that his best option was to play the role he'd been playing for 18 years rather than run, which meant either he didn't know about the corporate documentation or he had decided his cover was still intact enough to hold. Elena was in the operational room when Coyle appeared in the doorway and said simply, "He's here." Damien said, "Room 2." Room 2 was the room with 2 chairs and a table and a window, the containment room. Elena had spent time in it. She knew its specific quality of smallness. "I want to be there," she said. Both Damien and Coyle looked at her. "Not in the room," she said. "Adjacent. There's a connecting door. I want it open 6 inches. Damien held her gaze for a moment. "Why?" "Because you're about to sit in a room with the man who put you in that wheelchair," she said. "And I want to be close enough to hear you if something—" "I can handle Marco Fieri," Damien said. "I know you can handle him," she said. "That's not what I said." He looked at her for another moment. Something moved through his face. 6 inches, he said. She stood in the adjoining room with the door 6 inches open and listened. Marco Fieri entered room 2. She could hear the specific quality of his footsteps, a large man moving with the deliberate ease of someone who had decided on a performance and was committed to it. She heard him pull out the chair. She heard him sit. "Damien," he said. His voice was the voice she remembered from the cathedral, low, layered, carrying the particular warmth of long-term familiarity that she now understood had been, for 18 years, a kind of professional theater. "Marco," Damien said. A pause. "You called me." "I did," Damien said. "I was worried," Marco said. "After the wedding, the situation with Vivian, the DeLuca business, I've had people working on it. I want you to know that." "I know," Damien said. "Whatever Victor has been running, it's deeper than we thought." Marco said this with the specific tone of someone delivering bad news while appearing to be on your side. Elena heard it clearly. "He has connections inside the Ricci family. I've been trying to run that down. The money transfers are more complex than—" "Marco," Damien said. "The first analysis showed, and I think—" "Marco," Damien said again. "Different this time. Not louder, just different. More final." Silence. "The Cayman account," Damien said. "EH Holdings Limited. Dissolved in 2006. You were the registered director." The silence that followed lasted 6 seconds. Elena counted them. "That's—" Marco started. "Don't," Damien said. "Damien, there's an explanation for that. The account was part of a legitimate—" "Marco." The word was very quiet. "Don't." Another silence. Longer, this time. When Marco spoke again, his voice had changed. Not much, the man was a professional, and professionals didn't change entirely, but the quality of the warmth had been extracted from it. What was underneath the warmth was not cold exactly. It was something Elena didn't have a word for. The sound of a calculation being run in real time. "How long have you known?" Marco said. "Long enough," Damien said. "The documentation is—" "Complete," Damien said. Silence. "Then why am I here?" Marco said. "Because I wanted to hear you say it," Damien said. "Before the gala. Before everything else. I wanted to hear it from you directly." Elena pressed her palm flat against the wall beside the door. She was breathing very carefully. "Say what?" Marco said. "That it was you," Damien said. 18 years ago. The order. The car. The 2 men they put in the car who died, and the 1 man who was supposed to die and didn't. A pause so brief it barely existed. "Say it." Marco was silent for what felt like a very long time. Elena counted again. She'd stopped being conscious of counting, but her brain was doing it anyway. 11 seconds. "You were becoming a problem," Marco said finally. His voice had gone entirely flat. No warmth, no texture, no performance of anything. This was the actual voice, Elena realized, the one underneath all the other ones. The direction you were taking things, the expansion, the exposure, the political connections. It was too visible. The people above me at the time felt— "The people above you," Damien said. "I was 33 years old," Marco said. "I was given an instruction." "And you visited me in the hospital every day for 3 weeks," Damien said. Silence. "Every day," Damien said. "I remember you bringing food. My mother's food. You went to the restaurant she used to like, and you brought it in containers, and you sat next to the bed while I ate it." A pause. "I remember all of it." Marco said nothing. "I'm going to ask you a question," Damien said. "And I want the actual answer, not the version you've been carrying around, not the justification. The actual answer." A pause. "Did you know the 2 men in my car would die?" Another long silence. "Yes," Marco said. The word came through the 6-inch gap in the door and into the room where Elena was standing, and she felt it arrive with a physical weight she hadn't expected. She closed her eyes for a moment and then opened them. "They weren't the target," Marco said. "The collateral was— it was considered acceptable." "By who?" Damien said. "By people who are dead now," Marco said. "By people you made sure were dead." Which is the particular irony of this conversation. Damien, you've spent 18 years eliminating everyone who is connected to that attack. And the one who gave the instruction has been sitting across from you every Tuesday morning for all of those years. "I know," Damien said. "And I never suspected you," Damien said. No. A pause. That's the thing I'm going to have to live with. The flatness of it. Not anger, not devastation, but the specific plain sound of truth acknowledged and absorbed, cut through the door and through the wall, and into Elena's chest in a way she hadn't prepared for. She pressed her back against the wall. What happens now? Marco said. The gala, Damien said. And before the gala? Nothing, Damien said. You'll sit in a room here until then. You're not going to saw... No, Damien said. Not until everything is finished, and not the way you're thinking. A pause. I'm not my father, Marco. I'm not going to put you in a car. Then what? I'm going to make sure everyone who needs to understand what you are understands it, Damien said. In a room, in public, with documentation that makes it undeniable. A pause. And then I'm going to let the people whose job it is to handle it. Federal investigators, Marco said. Yes. A pause. That's not how this is done, Marco said. And there was something in his voice now, not quite disbelief, but the particular adjustment of a man who has spent decades inside a specific system and is encountering for the first time someone operating outside it. In our world, this is not how... She needed to know if Damien had known. That was the only question that mattered right now. Not the gala, not Marco, not Victor's voluntary disclosure, not the compromised surveillance footage. Whether Damien Valenti had known, in any form, that an operation connected to his organization had put her brother in a wheelchair 11 years ago. I'll call you, she said to Farr. She left the warehouse. Outside, the night air hit her face like something physical. She stood on the street for a moment, breathing it in. Then she started walking, but not running, walking, because running was not the thing she was doing. The thing she was doing was moving with the specific, deliberate purpose of someone who has made a decision and is executing it. She pulled out her phone and called Coyle. He answered before the first ring completed. Where are you? He said. Red Hook, she said. I need to get back to the estate. A car is 3 minutes from you, he said. Damien is... I know, she said. 3 minutes. The car was actually 2 minutes. She got in. She gave no address. The driver already had one. In the car, she sat in the same posture she'd sat in on every other car ride over the last 3 weeks. Back straight, hands in lap, eyes on the city moving past. But the city looked different from inside this particular moment. The lights were the same lights. The streets were the same streets. But they looked different in the way that things look different when you're seeing them from the other side of something irreversible. She thought about Damien's voice when he'd said, whatever you're doing with her, she wasn't in the wrong place. She thought about it with complete precision, the exact quality of it, the specific shift underneath the professionalism. She thought about whether she could ask him directly. She thought about what his face would do. She thought about what it would mean if the answer was yes. If the record showed that he'd known. If the operation had been authorized with his signature somewhere in a chain of entities and accounts. What it would mean for everything she'd been building in the last 3 weeks. Not the gala strategy, not the evidence archive, but the other thing. The thing that had been building in the specific way of things that build without being named. And she thought about what it would mean if the answer was no. The car pulled through the estate gates at 8:41. Damien was in the drive. This was not where Damien was ever. The drive was outside, exposed, 100 meters of open ground between the gate and the front entrance, and Damien operated inside, in rooms, in controlled environments. She had never seen him in the drive. He was there, in the wheelchair, in the dark, with one of the exterior lights behind him, making his shadow stretch long across the gravel. Coyle was 10 feet behind him. The car stopped. She got out. He looked at her with an expression she'd never seen on his face before. Not anger. Not the controlled flat nothing. Something that lived in the territory between those two things, in the specific geography of a person who has been very frightened for a defined period of time and is now looking at the thing they were frightened for and is running the confirmation that it's still intact. Farr, he said. Yes, she said. What did he tell you? She stood in the cold air in the driveway of his estate and looked at him. I need to see the independent archive, she said. The one Ferrante told Farr about, the financial records from 11 years ago. His face did something. How do you know about... Farr told me it exists, she said. I need to see what's in it. He was very still. Damien, she said, I need to see the records from 11 years ago. The construction arm, West 43rd Street. A site foreman named Tallis. She kept her voice level. She kept it entirely level. I need to know if you knew. The drive was silent. Coyle, 10 feet back, was looking at the ground. Damien looked at her for a long time. Longer than he usually looked at anything. And he was a man who looked at things for longer than most people. His face was doing several things simultaneously that she could not entirely separate from each other. She saw the moment when he understood what she was asking. She saw what happened after that moment. She watched his face absorb it. And she waited. Come inside, he said. Damien, come inside, he said. Please. The please landed differently than the other words. She followed him inside. He took her to the operational room, not room 2. The operational room with the screens and the table and the documents, which was the room where everything real happened. He positioned himself at the central terminal and typed something she couldn't see from where she was standing, and then a panel on the far wall, one that she had looked at dozens of times and registered as a wall, opened. Behind it, a secondary server unit. Stand alone. Air-gapped, she understood, meaning it had never been connected to any external network. The kind of archive that could only be accessed physically. He inserted a key, an actual physical key, old technology in a room full of new technology, and the system came online. He navigated for 40 seconds and then turned the screen toward her. She walked to it. The records were financial, structured the way she'd learned to read financial documents over the last 3 weeks, which was not expertly but sufficiently. She found the construction arm. She found the entity that connected to West 43rd. She found Ray Tallis's name in a contractor payment record. She found the date. She read for 4 minutes. Damien said nothing. He sat behind her and said nothing, and she was aware of him the way she was aware of everything in the room, acutely, with the specific heightened sensory quality of a moment that is recording itself into permanent memory as it happens. She found what she was looking for. An internal audit note, dated 3 weeks after Marcus's accident, flagged by someone inside the construction arms accounting department. A note about the Tallis contract. A note about an anomaly in the safety inspection records. The note had been forwarded up the chain. It had been received by an assistant whose name she didn't recognize. It had been marked, reviewed. No further action required. The signature on the reviewed notation was not Damien's. She looked for his name anywhere in the document chain. She went back further. The original authorization for the construction arm operations, the entity structure, the supervision chain. She followed it forward through the date of the accident and past it. She looked for his name or his signature or any notation that connected him directly to what had happened at that site. She didn't find it. What she found instead was a notation 18 months after the accident, a restructuring order for the construction arm signed by Damien that eliminated the specific subentity that had managed the West 43rd operation. No explanation given in the document, just a clean severing, methodical, and complete. She turned around. Damien was watching her. He had been watching her the entire time. His hands were in his lap, and he wasn't moving them, and his face was doing the thing it did when he was managing something very large very carefully. "You cut the construction arm," she said. "Yes," he said. 18 months after the accident. "Yes," he said. "Why?" she said. "Because I found out what the Tallis contract was," he said. "What it had been used for. I found out. Not immediately. It took time." He paused. "When I found out, I ended it. I ended every operation that had been running under that structure." "You didn't know before," she said. "No," he said. "I didn't know before." She looked at him. She was doing the thing she'd learned to do, not performing the assessment, actually doing it, looking at his face with everything she knew about him from 3 weeks of 6-inch doors and kitchen tables and 7-hour Saturdays and the specific way his hands moved when he was telling the truth versus managing it. She believed him. She believed him, and she didn't know if she believed him because it was true or because she needed it to be true, and she understood that she might never be entirely certain which of those things was operating. That uncertainty was going to be something she carried. She accepted that, standing in the operational room, looking at the man who had not known that something inside his organization had taken the thing most important to her and broken it. "Marcus," she said. "I know," he said. "You've known," she said. "Since when?" "Since the first night you told me his name," Damien said. "I had Reyes run it immediately. That's standard. Anyone who comes into my orbit, anyone with any proximity, I verify their full history." He paused. She found the site within 6 hours. She found the tallest connection within 24. Elena looked at him. "You've known for 3 weeks," she said. "Yes," he said. The room was very quiet. "And you said nothing," she said. "No," he said. "Why?" she said. He looked at her with an expression that was finally, entirely unmanaged. No professional architecture, no controlled neutrality, just his face with what was actually on it. "Because I was trying to find the right way to tell you something that has no right way," he said. "And because every day I was going to tell you, He stopped. He started again. "Because I was afraid," he said. "That's the accurate answer. I was afraid of what you'd do when you knew." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about Marcus at 2 a.m. in the dark. She thought about 2 years of twice-weekly drives to the Bronx. She thought about what it had cost her. Not in resentment. She had done it without resentment, but in the specific currency of time and presence and choosing one life over another life she might have had. She thought about the program, the 32 people, the 14 on the wait list, the things she'd built from the things she'd lost. She thought about whether it changed anything. Not legally. Barr's question, the records question, that had been answered. Not in terms of Damien's culpability. She'd read the documents, she'd followed the chain, she'd reached the conclusion that she'd reached. She thought about whether it changed the thing that had been building between them without being named. She understood that it was going to take time to know the answer to that question. She understood that right now, she didn't have time. "The gala is in 6 days, she said. He looked at her. "We have 6 days, she said, and I'm going to tell you something about Farr that you need to know. And then we're going to figure out whether he's an asset or a threat, and then we're going to finish this." She paused. "We're going to talk about Marcus, you and me, when this is over. We're going to sit in that kitchen with whatever food I bring, and we are going to talk about it properly." He was very still. "But right now," she said, 6 days. He looked at her with the particular look she'd come to understand was him being moved by something and not having the language ready. He didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "What do you know about Farr?" "He wants the 11-year archive," she said. "Ferrante told him it exists. He thinks it proves direct authorization of the construction operations." She paused. "It doesn't. But he doesn't know that. And the fact that he's been building a case against you for 4 years means he's motivated to find something that does." "He's not corrupt," Damien said. "No," she said. "I don't think he is." "Which makes him more dangerous than a corrupt investigator," Damien said. "It also makes him," she said carefully, "a potential witness at the gala. If he's presented with the Marco documentation, the 18 years, the attack, the Cayman account, and he verifies it independently." Damien's face changed. "A federal investigator verifying the evidence at the gala itself," he said. "Not as your ally," she said, "as an independent observer who can't be accused of being in your pocket. If Farr sees the Marco evidence for the first time in that room, Victor's attorney can't argue it's fabricated," Damien said. "Not if a federal investigator is present when it's presented and responds to it in real time," she said. He was looking at her with the expression she'd learned to identify as him recalculating something significant. "Farr is building a case against me," he said. "Inviting him into the gala is a risk," she said. "Yes, a significant one." "Yes," she said, "but you have the archive. If he sees the full archive, not just the 11-year records, all of it, the restructuring, the elimination of the construction arm, the absence of your direct authorization. He doesn't have a case. He has a man who didn't know something was happening inside his organization and ended it when he found out. That's not the same as innocence, Damien said. No, she said. It's not. She looked at him directly. Is it enough? He was quiet for a moment. For Far? For you, she said. He held her gaze. The operational room hummed quietly around them. The servers, the screens, the specific ambient frequency of a room full of running systems. Outside, she could hear the wind moving through the estate grounds. The night had gotten colder. Show Far the archive, he said. All of it, tonight. He paused. If he's going to be in that room, he needs to understand what he's walking into. She nodded. She took out her phone and called the Red Hook number. Far answered on the second ring. The archive is real, she said, and you can see it, tonight. But you see all of it, not just what you came for. A pause. And what you do with what you see is up to you. Silence on Far's end. I'm listening, he said. Come to the estate, she said. Now. She hung up. She looked at Damien. This could end everything early, he said. If Far decides the gala is an obstruction of... I know, she said. He could move to shut it down. Arrest warrants, seizure orders. If he comes in here and decides this whole operation is... Damien, she said. He stopped. Do you trust me? She said. The question was direct and simple, and landed in the room with the specific weight of a question that has never been asked before between two people who have been operating on some implicit version of its answer for 3 weeks. He didn't hesitate. Yes, he said. Then let me handle Far, she said. Far arrived at the estate at 9:55. Coyle brought him to the operational room where Damien and Elena were waiting. He came in with the specific posture of a man entering a situation he'd assessed as potentially dangerous and had decided to enter anyway, which Elena read as either courage or ambition and reserved judgment on which. He saw Damien and stopped. The two men looked at each other across the room with the particular quality of two people who have been aware of each other for a long time through documentation and surveillance and institutional knowledge and are now in the same physical space for the first time. Mr. Valenti, Far said. Agent Far, Damien said. Far looked at Elena. You brought him into this. He was already in it, she said. Sit down. Far sat. The next 2 hours were the most precise and exhausting 2 hours Elena had spent since the whole thing began, which was significant given what the preceding 3 weeks had contained. She walked Far through the archive, all of it systematically, beginning with the construction arm entity structure and moving forward through the accident, the internal audit notation, the unsigned approval, the restructuring order 18 months later. She showed him the absence. She showed him what Damien had done when he'd found out. Far said nothing for most of it. He looked. He asked 3 questions, short and specific, and she answered them. He asked to see the original tallest contract documents, and she showed him. He asked to see the restructuring order's authorization chain, and she showed him. He looked at Damien twice during the 2 hours. Once when she showed him the restructuring order, once when she showed him the notation about the subentity elimination. At the end, he sat back in his chair and was quiet for a long moment. The construction arm operated below your authorization threshold, he said to Damien. Not a question. Yes, Damien said. You restructured it when you found out what it had been used for. Yes, Damien said. Far looked at the table. He looked at his hands. He had the face of a man running a significant internal argument in real time. The gala, he said finally. 6 days, Damien said. What you're planning for the gala, Far said. The evidence presentation. Marco Fieri, Victor De Luca, the financial transfers, the 18-year conspiracy. He paused. You're planning to expose all of it in a room full of people and then invite federal investigators to handle the arrests. Yes, Damien said. You want me there, Far said. Yes, Damien said. Far looked at him. Why? Because the people in that room trust the evidence they can verify independently, Damien said. And because the people I'm exposing have attorneys who are very good at arguing that anything I present has been manufactured. A federal investigator who has been building a case against me for 4 years, present in the room, responding to evidence he's seen in real time. He paused. Nobody argues with that, not even Victor DeLuca's attorney. Farr was quiet. You've been building a case against me for 4 years, Damien said. You haven't had enough to move on. What I'm showing you in that gala room will tell you whether the organization I've been running for 30 years is the organization you think it is. A pause. I'm not asking you to trust me. I'm asking you to be in a room and see what you see. Farr looked at Elena. He didn't know about Marcus, she said. I've read the documents. I believe that. She paused. I know you think that's not an objective assessment. It's not, Farr said. No, she said. But it's what I have. She looked at him steadily. You've been looking for 4 years. Be in the room in 6 days and look. Another silence. I'll be there, Farr said. The 3 days between Farr's visit and the gala moved with the compressed, suffocating quality of time that is simultaneously too short and too long. Too short to do everything that needed doing. Too long to simply wait for it to be over. Elena slept at the estate from the 4th night forward, not because it had been formally arranged, but because leaving at midnight and arriving at 6 a.m. had started to feel like a performance of a boundary she was no longer actually maintaining, and she was not a woman who performed things for the sake of appearance. She took the room across from Vivian, who was present and calm in the specific way of someone who had made an irrevocable decision and had moved past the anxiety of making it into the territory of simply living with it. They talked, the two of them, in the evenings when the operational work had slowed. Not deeply, not the way Elena talked to people she'd known for years, but honestly, in the way that people talk when they're sharing a particular set of circumstances and have decided to be straight with each other inside those circumstances. He's different, Vivian said once on the second evening. They were in the kitchen, which had become Elena's room in the functional sense, the place where she came to think and to eat and to be in the estate without being in the operational mode. I know, Elena said. Since the cathedral, Vivian said. Since you. She said it without accusation or grief, as an observation. Elena didn't answer. That's not a bad thing, Vivian said. I want you to know that. For me, it's not a bad thing. Elena looked at her. Vivian DeLuca, who had left a man at the altar and spent weeks in his protected custody, and was about to stand in a ballroom and tell the truth to a room full of people who had complicated relationships with the truth. She was looking at Elena with something simple and direct in her face. Thank you, Elena said, and meant it. On the 5th day, Marco Fieri made his move. It came at 3:47 in the morning, which was the hour designed to catch people in the deepest part of sleep. Elena was not asleep. She'd been at the table in her room with the grant application, which was now complete except for one section that she'd been revising for 3 nights running, not because it was wrong, but because she kept finding ways to make it more accurate. She heard the alarm before anyone came to tell her, a low, sustained tone from the estate security system that she'd heard tested once before, and which sounded different when it was real. She was in the corridor before Coyle appeared. Marco, Coyle said. He got out? She said. He had help, Coyle said. From inside. He was moving as he spoke, already down the corridor toward the operational room. Damien's fine. The outer perimeter held. Marco is off the grounds. She followed him. Where did he go? We're tracking, Coyle said. He had a vehicle waiting. He's heading toward the city. In the operational room, Damien was already at the main terminal. He looked up when she came in. He took in her face with one glance, the specific comprehensive glance he had, the one that processed information quickly and completely, and said, the insider Marco used was one of the newer security staff. He's being held. How much does Marco know about the gala plan? She said. Everything, Damien said. What he told us he didn't know, he knew. He's been managing his knowledge carefully. He paused. He knows about Vivian's testimony. He knows about the financial documentation. He knows about Farr. Then he's going to Victor, she said, tonight, to give him everything. Yes, Damien said. Which means Victor has 12 hours to prepare a counter, she said. Before the gala tomorrow night. Yes, Damien said. She looked at the screens. She looked at the map showing Marco's vehicle moving through the dark city toward Manhattan. She looked at Damien, who was looking at the same map with the specific quality of a man who has been running a very long calculation and has arrived at the final terms of it. Move the gala up, she said. He looked at her. Not the date, she said. The start time. Move it from 8 p.m. to 6 p.m., 2 hours earlier. Victor's attorneys are filing in business hours. 2 hours earlier means Victor has less time to issue any injunctions, any preemptive legal action, anything that interferes with Farr's ability to make arrests in that room. She paused. Marco is going to tell Victor to call his attorneys first thing in the morning. If the gala starts at 6 p.m. instead of 8, they have 2 fewer hours. Damien looked at her for a long moment. Every guest was told 8 o'clock, he said. Then tell them 6, she said. Tonight, now. Send it as an upgrade, an exclusive pre-reception. Black tie from 6 p.m. Frame it as adding something, not changing something. He was already looking at Coyle. Do it, he said. Coyle left the room. Elena sat down at the table. Her hands were steady. She was running through the sequence in her mind. The order of the gala, the sequence of the evidence presentation, Vivian's testimony, Farr's positioning in the room, the specific moment when Marco's documentation would be revealed. She'd been through it 4 times in the last week. She was going through it again, looking for the gap. There's one thing, she said. Damien looked at her. Victor's going to try to discredit Vivian in the room, she said, before you can present her testimony. The moment she becomes visible in that ballroom, he's going to move to control the narrative. He'll say she's been coerced. He'll say she's unstable. He'll say she had a breakdown after the wedding and she's been manipulated by... She paused. By you. And by me. By you specifically, Damien said. By the woman from the cathedral, she said. Yes. I'm a liability in that room. My presence gives Victor a story to tell about you. That you brought in an outsider, that you've been operating sentimentally instead of rationally, that your judgment is... Elena, he said. It's a real vulnerability, she said. I'm telling you because... I know it's real, he said. I've known it for 3 weeks. He looked at her steadily. I'm not removing you from that room. She looked at him. You walked up that aisle, he said. Everything started there, everything... He stopped. He said it differently. You're in that room. Whatever Victor tries to make of it, we'll manage it. She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about all the things she'd been not saying for 3 weeks, and all the things he'd been not saying, and the specific way those 2 silences had been existing in the same spaces together and becoming something she didn't have a word for yet. Okay, she said. The gala ballroom of the Meridian Hotel in Midtown Manhattan was a space designed to make power feel comfortable. 60-foot ceilings, crystal lighting, a floor that had been walked on by 6 decades of men and women who believed themselves important, which some of them were. On the evening of the event, it was transformed from its usual configuration into something that moved between celebration and tribunal in a way that only the people who had designed it understood. Elena stood at the edge of the ballroom at 5:47, 13 minutes before the doors opened, wearing the only formal dress she owned, dark blue, simple, the kind of dress that belonged to itself rather than to an occasion, and watched the room fill with the specific quality of light that happened when 1,000 candles competed with crystal chandeliers and lost, gracefully. Vivian was somewhere in the building, in a room off the main corridor, with Coyle 6 feet from her door. Farr was somewhere in the building, in a different room, with a communication channel to his team that he'd insisted on and Damien had agreed to without negotiation. Damien was at the center of the ballroom. She watched him from across the room. He was receiving guests. The specific practiced ritual of the host greeting arrivals, hand extended, eye contact sustained for exactly the right duration, nothing in his face giving anything away. The room was filling with the people she'd been reading about and thinking about for 3 weeks. Senators and judges, and the heads of families whose names appeared in the documentation as betrayers and conspirators and willing participants in a very long, very carefully constructed destruction of one man's authority. They were all here. Victor DeLuca arrived at 6:12. She saw him from across the room and understood immediately what Vivian had meant by "he does not tolerate the things he needs kept quiet." He was a man in his mid-60s who moved through a room with the specific ease of someone who had never been made to doubt his own centrality. He was handsome in the way that money and authority make men handsome, past the age when the underlying structure would support it. He was smiling at someone near the door, and the smile was warm and real in a way that made Elena's stomach do something cold. Vivian had grown up loving that smile. Victor looked across the room and found Damien. The look they exchanged lasted 4 seconds and contained nothing that an observer could describe as anything other than two acquaintances acknowledging each other across a crowded room. Elena had been watching carefully enough to see what was actually in it. Victor calculating, adjusting, running the information Marco had given him at 4 a.m. against what he was seeing now. Damien giving him nothing, giving him the flat, controlled, perfect nothing that had been his primary instrument for 30 years. Victor looked away first. Elena moved through the room toward the service corridor that ran along the eastern wall. She needed to be in position before the presentation began. Damien had planned the sequence precisely: 40 minutes of circulation, then to the stage, then the evidence. She was 10 feet from the service corridor when someone stepped into her path. Not a guest, not a staff member. A man she recognized from the surveillance photographs. The younger one, thin, unremarkable, with the intensity she'd identified even through grainy long-lens photography. Luca Ferrante, who was supposed to be in federal custody. She stopped. He was close enough that she could see the specific quality of his eyes, which were the eyes of someone running on adrenaline and something harder and older than adrenaline. He said, very quietly, leaning toward her with the particular intimacy of someone who wants their words to carry and not carry. The testimony recording, Vivian's video, we have a copy. She kept her face neutral. That's not possible, she said. The estate's backup system, he said. Before you went air-gapped on the primary archive. There was a window. He paused. 40 minutes. We have the recording. She looked at him. Victor is going to play it, Ferrante said. Tonight, before Valenti gets to the stage. He's going to play it, and he's going to show that Vivian's testimony was recorded under duress, that she was coached, that you told Farr you wanted immunity, she said. I did want immunity, he said, and then someone made me a better offer. She looked at him for exactly 2 seconds. 2 seconds was what she had. When is Victor planning to do this, she said. 20 minutes, Ferrante said. He's going to take the stage himself. He's going to frame the whole evening as a public intervention. He's going to say Damien has been... She was already moving. She didn't run. Running in a ballroom full of 600 people was not the thing. She moved with the specific, purposeful speed of a woman who knew where she was going through the service corridor to the room where Coyle was stationed outside Vivian's door. Ferrante is in the ballroom, she said to Coyle. Victor has a copy of the video. He's going to use it in 20 minutes. Coyle's face did something rapid and controlled. Is Ferrante? He's in the crowd, she said. Right side, near the east wall. Get him out of that room. She paused. And get Damien, now. Coyle's hand went to his earpiece. She opened Vivian's door without knocking. Vivian looked up from the chair she was sitting in. She was already dressed, already composed, with the specific calm of someone who had made an irrevocable decision. Victor has your video, Elena said. Something moved through Vivian's face. Not panic. Something more complicated. He found the backup. Yes, Elena said. He's going to use it. In 20 minutes. He's going to tell the room it was recorded under duress. It wasn't, Vivian said. I know it wasn't, Elena said. But he's going to make the room believe it was. She paused. Unless you're out there first. Vivian looked at her. Before Victor takes the stage, Elena said. Before he can set the narrative. If you walk into that ballroom right now and you speak first, he'll try to stop me, Vivian said. Let him try, Elena said. In front of 600 people and a federal investigator. She paused. Vivian, you told me you owe him this. You told me you'd testify. This is the testifying, right now. earlier than planned and harder than planned. Vivian DeLuca stood up from the chair. She was taller than Elena had registered in other contexts. She stood fully upright with the specific posture of someone who had been carrying a very heavy thing and had put it down, and the release of it had made her an inch taller. "Walk me in," Vivian said. They went back through the service corridor and into the ballroom. Elena saw Damien the moment she emerged. He was already moving. Coyle had reached him. He knew. He was navigating toward the stage with the controlled efficiency of someone revising a plan in motion. He caught her eye across 30 meters of crowded ballroom, and she gave him the single small nod that meant, "I have her." And she saw his face do something in response to that nod that was not small at all. Agent Dennis Farr placed his hand on Victor DeLuca's shoulder at 9:41 p.m. in front of 600 witnesses, in a ballroom that had gone so quiet you could hear the chandeliers. Victor didn't move. He stood exactly where he'd been standing for the last 4 minutes since the Cayman account documentation had appeared on the screen with Marco Fieri's name printed clearly enough for everyone in the room to read. He stood with his hands at his sides and his face doing nothing. And when Farr said the words, "Saram," the specific formal words that Farr had said hundreds of times in his career and that never got shorter or easier regardless of the context, Victor nodded once, very slightly, like a man accepting a bill he'd known was coming. He didn't look at Vivian. Vivian, still on the stage, was looking at him. Elena watched her face during those seconds and understood that what was moving through it was not triumph. It was the specific grief of a person watching someone they once loved become something they can no longer protect. Vivian had grown up in the warmth of that man's attention. She had made the worst decision of her life because of it. Neither of those things canceled the other. Elena understood that. She had spent enough time with grief to know its specific texture when it wore the clothes of something else. Farr's colleagues moved through the room with the quiet efficiency of people who had been briefed and were executing, and one by one, the men whose names appeared in the documentation were approached and separated from the crowd with the minimum of spectacle that a federal operation inside a ballroom full of cameras could achieve, which was still significant spectacle, but not the kind anyone could call theatrical. 3 senators, 2 judges, 4 men whose names Elena recognized from the financial records, and whose faces she was now putting to names for the first time. The room took all of it in with the particular silence of 600 people who are witnesses and know they are witnesses and are, for this specific duration, not talking. Damien's hand was still in hers. He was watching the arrest with his face in the neutral configuration, but she could feel through the contact of his hand something that the face wasn't showing, a very specific quality of release, like a pressure that has been sustained so long it has become indistinguishable from the person sustaining it, and is only recognizable as separate in the moment it begins to ease. 18 years. She held his hand and felt that release and said nothing. After a while, she didn't track the minutes. The arrests were complete, and Farr was at the edge of the room with the specific posture of a man who has finished one phase of something and is beginning to calculate the next. He looked across the room at Damien. He held the look for a moment. Then he gave a single nod. Not warm, not collegial, but honest. The nod of a man who has seen something he didn't expect to see and is adjusting his understanding accordingly. Damien returned it. The room began, slowly and carefully, to exhale. Vivian came down from the stage. She moved through the crowd with her head up and her face composed in the specific way of someone who is saving the falling apart for later, in private, which Elena understood was the only appropriate container for it. She walked to Elena and stopped. "Thank you," she said. "You did it," Elena said. "I just got you to the stage." Vivian looked at her. Something in her face shifted. Not the public composure, something underneath it. The part that was tired and relieved and still grieving the version of her uncle that had never entirely existed. "Take care of him," she said. Very quietly. Not as an instruction. As something closer to permission. Elena looked at her. "Take care of yourself first," she said. Vivian DeLuca nodded once. Then she walked toward the exit with Coyle 3 steps behind her, and Elena watched her go, and that was the last time they were in the same room. It took another 90 minutes for the ballroom to empty. Not the arrested, who were gone within 40 minutes, but the remaining 400 guests who needed to be present long enough for what they'd witnessed to settle into the permanent record of their memory. Damien moved through the room for those 90 minutes doing what hosts do, acknowledging, receiving, managing the specific texture of an event that has gone far beyond its original parameters. He was extraordinary at it. She watched him from various positions around the room, and she thought, he has been doing this for 30 years. The management of rooms, the management of people inside rooms, the particular skill of making others feel that everything is under control. What she knew now, that she hadn't known 3 weeks ago, was how much it cost. At 11:23, the ballroom was empty except for the catering staff breaking down the event, and Damien and Elena and Coyle at the door. Damien looked at the empty room for a moment. The chandeliers were still lit, throwing light at a space that no longer held anyone to receive it. The tables still had glasses on them. The screens at the front were dark. "It's over," Elena said. "Most of it," he said. "The legal process," she said. "Yes," he said. "That will take time." "But this part," she said. "The room, the people. What needed to happen in public?" "Yes," he said. "This part is over." She looked at him. He was looking at the empty stage, and his face was doing the thing she had come to understand was him being actually present in a moment rather than managing it. The slight softening around the eyes, the particular quality of stillness that was rest rather than control. "Kitchen," she said. He looked at her. "Your kitchen," she said. "Right now. I'm going to make something and you're going to eat it, and we're going to talk about Marcus." He was quiet for a moment. "Tonight." "Tonight," she said. "It needs to be tonight." She saw him absorb that. She saw him understand what she meant, that carrying it another day, another week, was not something either of them could sustain, that the thing they had been deferring in the interest of the gala and the evidence and the sequential urgency of everything that had been urgent needed to be brought into the light while they were still in the aftermath of bringing other things into the light, while that particular muscle was still warm. "Yes," he said. The estate kitchen at midnight was the same kitchen it had always been. Large, professionally equipped, and fundamentally unused in the way of kitchens and houses where food is staff-managed rather than personally made. Elena had changed its quality over the weeks simply by being in it, by the accumulated presence of her own habits in the space. The specific way she organized the counter when she was working, the pot she'd claimed by virtue of repeated use, the particular corner where she set her bag. She made congee again, not because it was the only thing she knew how to make in someone else's kitchen, but because it was the right thing for midnight and for what they needed to say. She made it carefully, with the particular attention she brought to things that mattered in ways she couldn't entirely articulate: rice and water and ginger and the low heat that required patience. Damien sat at the kitchen table. He didn't offer to help. She didn't ask him to. This was understood between them. "Tell me," she said, from the stove with her back to him. He was quiet for a moment. She heard him move the wheelchair slightly, the small adjustment he made when he was settling in rather than positioning strategically. "When Reyes found the site," he said, "the night you told me Marcus's name, I spent 4 hours with the documents, going back through the construction arm, through the entity structure, through the tallest contract." A pause. "I found the audit note. The one that came up the chain. The one I didn't see because it went to an assistant and was marked reviewed." "You would have stopped it," she said, still to the stove. "I don't know that," he said. "I want to say yes, but I don't know it." She appreciated the honesty of that. She stirred the pot. "What I know," he said, "is that when I found out, 18 months later, through a different channel, through a problem in the account structure that made someone look twice, what I know is that I shut it down. The whole arm, everything connected to it." He paused. "I told myself it was a structural decision, a liability issue. I told myself—" He stopped. "I was not honest with myself about why I did it." She turned around. He was looking at the table. "Why did you do it?" she said. He looked up. "Because what had happened to the people on that site was wrong," he said. "Not strategically wrong. Wrong." He said the word with the specific weight of someone who has spent a long time in a life where that distinction rarely gets made, and is making it now with the deliberate intention of someone choosing a different direction. I knew it was wrong, and I removed the capability that had allowed it to happen, and I told myself that was sufficient, and I moved on. He paused. It wasn't sufficient. The kanji was close. She turned back to it. No, she said. It wasn't. I know that, he said. Marcus spent 8 years, she said. Her voice was level. She had practiced this levelness, not the performance of it, but the actual management of her own body while saying difficult things, which was a skill she'd developed over a very long time. 8 years building a different life than the one he'd planned. 8 years of that program, of the work, of becoming someone who could move through the world in a different way than he'd expected to move through it. She stirred the pot. He became someone extraordinary. He would have told you he was just adapting, but what he was doing was extraordinary. She paused. And he never knew why it happened. Damien said nothing. He died not knowing, she said. Whether that's better or worse than knowing, I genuinely cannot tell you. I've been thinking about it for 3 weeks and I can't answer it. I'm sorry, Damien said. The words were simple and without construction around them. She took the pot off the heat. She stood with her back to him for a moment longer than she needed to. Not because she was managing herself, but because she was allowing the moment to be what it was without rushing into the next one. Then she brought 2 bowls to the table and sat down. He looked at the bowl. He looked at her. I don't know how to make this right, he said. I know that's inadequate. I'm telling you anyway because you deserve the actual statement rather than the version that sounds better than it is. She looked at him. I know you don't know how, she said. I'm not asking you to. Then what are you asking? He said. She thought about it. She thought about what the honest answer was. Not the version she might have constructed in advance, but the one that was actually true in this specific kitchen, at this specific hour, after this specific night. I'm asking you to let the foundation do what it's going to do, she said. The Valenti Foundation, the rehabilitation centers, the adaptive movement program. She paused. Not as restitution. Not as, don't make it restitution. Make it what you said it was. A mission. She looked at him steadily. There are 32 people in my current program and 14 on the wait list. There are hundreds more in this city who don't have access to any program. Make that your answer. Not to me. To the fact that something under your name caused damage, and you have the capacity to build something from it. He was looking at her with an expression she'd never seen before. Not the controlled flatness, not the unmanaged face from the operational room when the Marco documentation had arrived. Something quieter than either, something that had been a long time in formation. I already started the process, he said. 6 days ago, the first facility. He paused. In Brooklyn. She was very still. The lease was signed last Tuesday, he said. 12,000 square feet, accessible design throughout. Staff positions budgeted for 8 full-time facilitators and a director. He paused. I was going to tell you after the gala. She looked at him. I didn't want it to be... He stopped. He started differently. I didn't want you to think it was about the gala, about the strategy, about anything other than what it is. What is it? She said. It's the right thing, he said, because something wrong happened under my name, and the right thing is not to erase it, but to build something from the same ground. He paused. And because you showed me what that looks like. You've been showing me for 3 weeks. She was quiet for a long moment. Outside the kitchen window, the estate grounds were dark and still. The night had gone completely clear after the rain. The kind of clear that only comes after a long period of weather, when the sky finally runs out of what it's been carrying and releases it all at once. She could see stars through the glass. She hadn't seen stars in weeks. Marcus would have liked you, she said. Damien was quiet. He wouldn't have said so immediately, she said. He would have taken about 6 months to decide, and then he would have told me very casually, as if he'd always thought so. She almost smiled. But he would have liked you. Damien looked at her with the quiet face, the one that had no management in it. I would have liked him, he said, and meant it, simply without construction. They ate the congee. It was good. Not perfectly seasoned, not restaurant calibrated, but good in the way of things made carefully with limited equipment and the right intention. The kitchen was warm. The house was quiet in the way of a house that has let something go and is resting in the aftermath. After a while, he said, "The dance." She looked at him. "In the cathedral," he said, "you asked me to dance." "I remember," she said. "I've been thinking about it," he said, "since that morning. The specific thing you did, walking up that aisle, why you did it." He paused. "I understand now that it wasn't about me, not primarily. It was about your brother, about what you'd learned from him about not letting someone sit alone in a bad moment." "Yes," she said. "But I've been thinking," he said, "about what it meant to me, specifically, in that moment." He paused. Not the public version, not what it looked like to the room, what it meant when you came and stood in front of me and looked at me like I was a person who deserved to be seen rather than managed or pitied or used. He stopped. "I don't know the last time someone looked at me that way. Before you." She held his gaze across the kitchen table. "You looked at me the same way," she said, "from the beginning, every time." He was quiet for a moment. "Elena," he said. "Yes," she said. "I'm not easy," he said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm not going to become easier because of what happened tonight or what happens after it. I'm a man who has 30 years of specific habits and a particular set of damage and a legal situation that is going to be complicated for longer than either of us can currently predict. I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're—" He stopped. "What this is." She looked at him steadily. "I ran a rehabilitation program for 8 years," she said. "I spent 2 years driving my brother to the Bronx twice a week and sitting in waiting rooms and learning how to be present with someone who was working very hard at something very difficult." She paused. "I am not afraid of complicated." He looked at her. "I'm also not a patient," she said. "I want to be clear about that too. I'm not here to fix you or help you adapt or any version of what I do at the program. I'm here because—" She stopped. She said it plainly. "Because I want to be here. Because this, you and me, in this kitchen, at this table, this is where I want to be." The words settled into the room. Damien's hand moved across the table. Not reaching, placing. He set his hand on the table between them, palm up, open, the specific gesture of someone who has spent a long time keeping their hands in their lap and is doing something different now. She placed her hand in it. They sat like that for a while. The kitchen hummed. The stars were still visible through the window. The kanji cooled between them. Eventually he said very quietly, "There will be another event, in the spring, when the first facility opens, a celebration, families, participants, the people the program will serve." He paused. "I'd like there to be music." "There should be music," she said, "and I'd like," he said, "when the music starts—" He stopped. He looked at her with the face that had nothing managed in it. "I'd like to be the one who asks this time." She understood what he meant. The cathedral, the walk down the aisle, the dance without music that had started all of this. The reversal of it. Him asking instead of being asked. The specific symmetry of it, which was not symmetry about gender or ability or any of the things the room would inevitably read into it, but about something simpler, the exchange between two people of the thing that had been given and the thing that could now be given back. "You'll have to practice," she said. "I know," he said. "I'll show you," she said, "before spring." He looked at her with the quiet face. "Yes," he said. Outside, the sky over the estate held its stars. The same sky that had been gray and holding its breath the morning of the wedding that never happened. The morning that had started all of this in a cathedral with a question and a woman who refused to look away. The same sky, different now, or the same and simply seen differently, which amounted to the same thing. Elena Mercer sat in a kitchen at midnight, holding the hand of a man who was learning to stop confusing isolation with strength, and she thought about Marcus. She thought about him the way she'd learned to think about him in the 3 years since, not as loss, or not only as loss, but as the specific shape he'd left in her life. the particular education of him, the way a person's absence continues to teach you things their presence only began. She thought, he would have liked this kitchen.